Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman. At The Reason We Learn, we aspire to be part of the solution. The purpose of this show is to take a good, honest, potentially painful look at the way kids are being educated. We know we can do better, and this is where we'll talk about how. Let's learn something. Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm so glad you're here. I have another great show for you today about a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, and that is surveillance. Something we all need to be concerned about. It's being talked about a lot in the news. It's definitely a big deal in our schools, but it's something I think a lot of people don't fully understand. So I've invited my guest today to discuss it with us because it's something that I think he's very concerned about as well. And he's in Canada. So we'll get a slightly different perspective, but one that I think we all need to hear. So if you are new to this channel, before we get going, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to be notified when I make new content. Every one of these shows that I bring you, interview or analysis, is an effort to make you aware of something going on in education or something going on in our culture and society to help us work together to improve the ideas that are circulating, improve our discourse. This one will be no exception. David Krae is a film director, actor, producer, and author. After years working on both sides of the camera as an actor and crew member on various film and television projects, in 2006, he directed an independent feature film, The House, which was featured as an official selection of the Canadian Filmmakers Festival. He has been on this channel before to talk to me about issues around culture and society and our discourse and entertainment and various things. And as I said at the outset, I think it's very important for us not to get tunnel vision and just think of education happening in schools. It happens all around us. And we adults need to get educated from time to time. And surveillance is one of those topics that we need to be better educated about before we start asking for it in our schools. So I've seen him talk a lot about it on X, and I've invited him here again to talk to us about it now. So please join me in welcoming my guest, David Krae. Hello, hello.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. Welcome back. I'm so glad you're here.
Thanks. Oh, it's great to be back.
So, as I mentioned in the intro, you are Canadian, you're in Canada, and I couldn't help but notice some things going on up there in America's Chapeau. So
Right.
I joke, I kid, but not
America's
really.
hat. Yes. Yeah.
So what should we know about that? I mean, to the extent that you can speak about it at this point. I know it's brand new, so you're probably still digesting.
Yeah, and notes, notes are coming out. I haven't read the legislation yet. But I think is it Bill 67? There are a couple different laws being proposed or pieces of legislation going through the government right now. That are people aren't too happy about. This first of all, they have they call it the Online Harms Act, and it's the current government, the Liberal government's attempt to say, well, we want to protect everyone from having their feelings hurt on the internet and from spreading hate and here's the insidious word, misinformation. Which is who defines that, right? When you have a political party controlling a government, they get to define misinformation as anything that contradicts their political views. So, and we all already have a prime minister who's frozen people's bank accounts for just peaceful protesting. So you could see how this the slippery slope is already slipping. They've already made some bad moves without even giving themselves this authorization. And one thing that's different in Canada that they have these things called human rights commissions. So someone can file a complaint with this human rights commission, and it's not like a regular court of law. There's a whole other process there, and it's much as far as I understand it, a much lower requirement. It's compared to like proving someone guilty without a reasonable in a court of law and all that stuff. So they're like these pseudo courts, and they just keep adding powers to them, giving them more stuff to do. So anyway, it's very cynical. They're using that hot button they're pushing people's buttons. Think of the children. Think of this young child was bullied and committed suicide a few years ago. And I mean, I saw on a program the other day where someone was talking about a case that happened, and they're like, "This is to stop." To me, that's it's unfortunate, it's sad, but it's also political opportunism. They're basically saying, oh, it's to keep the children safe, and every decent person is going to say, oh, well, if it's to keep the kids safe, well, we have to do it. We should do it. They shut their brains off. They don't ask any questions beyond that. They go, well, and they tried this 10 years ago. 10 years ago, back in 2012, there was it wasn't the liberal government, it was the conservative government at that time. And on Valentine's Day, they announced, we're going to do this national surveillance program. Everything's we're going to create a whole new department under the Ministry of Public Safety, of inspectors, a special class of inspectors. So basically a private secret police force.
Right.
They oh no, it's not that. I'm like, well, they report to the Minister of Public Safety, who's obviously a politician, an elected politician, right, who has massive amount of powers. There was no it was an endless budget. They had the ability to access any device at any time and make copies of any information. They were going to share information with foreign entities without any review. So it was warrantless access to everybody's telecommunications, and that was proposed by the conservative government, the Conservative Party, and their people. So where it gets really insidious is people. Oh yeah, and they did it on Valentine's Day in 2012, and said that anyone who and they said it was to the Act to Protecting Children Against Internet Predators or something like that, I think was the name. And the Minister of Public Safety who announced it said, if anyone who doesn't support this bill is supporting the child pornographers, right? And so of course, immediately anyone who questioned it, anyone who went online and said, hey, what's this about? This is they immediately were attacked by random Twitter accounts and random Discus accounts. Back then, there are a lot of, on the news sites. They remember when Discus was really popular. It still is. I mean, but a lot of people switch to Facebook foolishly.
Right.
But like you would get attacked. You would get attacked for daring even to question it. They say, you're one of the evil the child abusers out there.
You must like it. Let's check your hard drive.
Right.
And for all you know, that gets you on the radar. You question the government's policy on this, and now you're on the radar to be looked at, and
and have your life turned upside down.
Right. And what's ironic to me is how many people believe that some of these child porn and trafficking rings have people high up in governments who are part of them, who are like benefiting from them financially, are also on the bandwagon of these kinds of bills.
Well, how much of
and I'm like,
right? How much of it? Well, how much of it's like the politician who's super anti-gay, right? Super like, and then it comes out they got caught in a bathroom with and you're like, they were hiding it, they were trying to deflect. So maybe there's some of that going on. I think what this comes down to is it's short-sighted, small-minded thinking. I like to something I like to post on X, Twitter, whatever we want to call it now, is that nobody should be elected to political office unless they understand the concept of counterintuitive, right? What is counterintuitive? And the reason I say that is, if you think if we'll create a stricter law, a law that is going to scare the bejesus out of everyone into behaving, right? That's really what it comes down to, right? Whether it's the radicals on the identitarian left who want everyone to conform to their latest pronoun policy or whatever they're pushing out, or it's the fundamentalists on the right who think everybody is a sinner and needs to be controlled, right? They have this one-to-one idea that the tougher the law, the more people will behave, right? And that's how we'll do it. And it's just simple deterrence. And for the big things like don't murder, don't kill, don't steal, like, yeah, everybody kind of understands if you do those things, you get caught, you're going to get punished, right? But beyond that, beyond those basic,
well, the ones that are actually rights violating, like I'm directly trespassing against your rights, I steal from you, I shoplift from your store, I beat you up, these kinds of things, then yes, when there's a strict consequence for that behavior, we can see the relationship. Hey, we stop enforcing shoplifting laws and look what happens. People are stealing. We
Right.
stop enforcing laws about assaulting the police. They assault the police more. So people see that, I think, David, and then they extrapolate out to the ones where you cannot, first of all, properly objectively name the crime, harm.
The harm, yes.
What is that? Right?
Harm.
And so on, and things that are happening in like cyberspace. So we don't really see, we can't do a one-to-one correlation between action, reaction, that's a crime, a right has been violated without some kind of participation of both parties. And they're saying, well, what works here, it's going to work with that. And like, they're not even the same species
of
behavior.
And they want to, they're constantly trying to expand what is hate speech, for instance, hate speech, right? Like as a big buzz idea or buzzword. And they want to expand what that is, right? Oh, it used to be, directly inciting violence towards a person or group or something, like have tangible. And you could understand that as a concept. Sure. Whether you're a free speech absolutist or not, you can at least understand why they might want to say, well, that's like your direct incitement, thing like that. But then, like, there are a lot of political movements active right now who are popular among major political parties in the United States, in Canada, and the UK, and all around the world, that are like, well, questioning my gender is hate speech, right? You've called me by a name I no longer use, therefore you have committed an act of hate, and I'm gonna report you to this tribunal, this Human Rights Commission, and have you charged. And so now you have these, and you did it on the internet. So this online harms act that they're pushing in Canada, it addresses. They're saying, well, we think people should be safe on the internet. I'm like, it's the internet. There's nobody nobody can punch you through the internet. Nobody can shoot you through the internet. Like, it's the internet. They can say mean things to you, and hurt your fifis, but and they do. And what's funny about it is the people who are begging for this stuff, because they want their pronouns protected, are pretty vicious themselves.
Oh, yes.
Right. But
death threats galore. I just asked J.K. Rowling.
Right. And they feel justified. You see, part of this, the ideology says is this idea, this paradigm of, and I think we've spoken about that previously, of the oppressed and the oppressor, right? So if you believe you are the oppressed, then any act, no matter how despicable, against your oppressor, right? Yes. Is just an act of liberation. It's just an act of resistance and freedom, and you're justified in doing it, right? So when you're dealing with a major political ideology and movement that sees the world that way, you can see how a lot of this stuff would get abused. I mean, part of the thing on Twitter when Elon took over, right? How many people did he fire? And when they came out with the Twitter files, they showed, like, not only they showed collusion with political interests in government, right, where they were looking at things people were saying on the internet, saying on X, right, or on Twitter, I guess back then, and wanting it taken down. They were, take this down, we don't like this. I'm like, that's political interference with people's free speech. And secondly, you had activist employees at Twitter who pushing their ideology, suppressing people who wanted to debate and discuss some of these topics. I mean, there were a lot of things you couldn't see. You couldn't even type certain words and phrases into the platform, and without being suspended or banned, or my original primary Twitter account got a 12-hour suspension in October of 2019 because I disagreed with some radicals who were on the concept of privilege. And so then their response was to say, well, you're an abuser, and they were basically casting criminal aspersions towards me. So I got annoyed and called them a not nice name. So of course they were a group of people. I was by myself. They I guess they call it brigading, when people they coordinate amongst themselves and attack you. And then basically, so they picked a fight. I argued back, and then they did that Darvo trick where they what is it? Reverse victim and
Deny.
offender.
Yeah, deny, attack, reverse victim offender.
Yeah, and so they reported me. My account got suspended for 12 hours. So I was like, okay, what, right? So I try to log back in, and Twitter's demanding all this information from me. And before they'll let me access my account, I'm like, no, I don't trust you with my information, because they got hacked back in 2013, and I still get extortion emails, like many of them, like almost daily, quoting my password that I used to use, like all my stuff, like, and the emails look like they're from me. Right?
That's
So they're
so
spoofing my own
scary.
email address, saying we have control over your computer and we've got video footage of you doing naughty things. And I'm like, you owe me money if you have that footage. But
Right?
right,
That's funny.
talked to my actors union, because I don't know if they cover those royalties. But
That's
anyway,
funny.
and so I can't access that account. Get this, I try to send a message to, even now, I try to send a message from that account to Twitter support or X support. I don't get a notification. It's black holed. It's either a glitch. Is it a glitch? Maybe it's a glitch. Or
Mhm.
someone in admin who banned my account made it so that I can't contact support from it.
Right.
So that account is still locked 4 years later, 12-hour suspension. So I had to start over. Yeah, total. So these are the little insidious things, the ways that people in the bureaucracy can abuse these powers, right? This is a simple example.
Well, to your point about
Mhm.
them thinking that stricter rules make better behavior, I think I've seen you say on X before that in point of fact, they actually lead to more corruption. And you've just
Mhm.
described in vivid detail an example of corruption that can happen on the inside. It's amazing to me that people once they get into the headspace of we need more surveillance of everyone, then they forget first of all they're part of everyone. It's like they're going to be exempted. And the second thing is they forget to ask themselves who are these pure and magical people who have no personal interest, agenda, whatever, to, you were going to hand that power to over everybody else to make sure everybody else is behaving. People on the left forget about human nature and want to pretend it
Mhm.
doesn't exist, and people on the right forget about it. They're going to pick the saints.
Well, and they think that it's going to be their people who are going to
Always.
have this
They
access to this
think
power.
they're not part of the people who are gonna
Yeah,
get it's only gonna be the bad people. It's only gonna be
yeah,
the child pornographers and the traffickers and the drug dealers and
yeah,
the horrible people. And over here it's only gonna be the Nazis and
yeah.
the religious fanatics, whatever.
And who's
And
going to be running these systems? Who are going to be the ones going after them? It's only going to be their guys, right? Well,
always.
our guys are going to have these powers, and we trust our
Right.
guys. And then
And
the
and
other
when all
guys,
this is happening, the elections will keep us free.
right? Yeah, and because all of a sudden you can't uh, speak about certain topics anymore without being censured, without being censored.
And that can
Um,
never affect an election outcome, right? I mean, when we
no, no.
when we ban the New York Post and we ban any discussion of Hunter's laptop and we can't talk about certain virus policies and so on, then I'm
Mhm.
sure that doesn't in any way take the low info voter who's not studying everything and listening to Joe Rogan, like as best they can. That's not in any way going to cover up information they might need before they go and vote.
It's a lot of people seem to have a hard time connecting this idea that we'll call it democracy or representative, whatever. The system of government that most modern Western nations have, which is where we have free elections. Anyone can
Mhm.
run for politics,
Right.
um, political office, whatever you want to call that system. I know some people think democracy is like just a mass mob rule. I'm like, they're all versions of it: constitutional, republican, parliamentary, whatever.
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
But this disconnect between the idea of like, well, everyone gets to vote. I'm like, well, everyone votes in North Korea apparently. In fact, I think they get like 110% turnout to vote for Kim Jong Un. Um, I mean, but I mean that's the problem, right? Uh, but if you can't speak about the issues, if you can't debate, discuss freely, if you can't say the wrong thing and make a mistake and be wrong, um, you can't have your vote isn't free. If you're not
No.
able to freely discuss it ahead of time, then your vote is not free. You're just doing what you're told. And that was the Soviet system.
Yeah.
I mean, I know my bio focuses mainly on what I've been doing the last few years in terms of filmmaking and writing and things like that. And but before I sort of gave it all up to pursue a career in the arts, um, I was the great. I was supposed to, according to my family, I was supposed to go to law school. I'm a great disappointment there. But I was working. I did work overseas for a period in the '90s, helping. It wasn't for a very long time, but because I didn't find it fulfilling. That's a whole other story. Helping with post-communist transition to modern democracy and free market economics, and it was a government contractor connected to the embassy over there, and it was really interesting work. And there was a group of us all over the former Eastern Bloc countries, and I had. It's funny because I had been studying. My academic background was in history of espionage and statecraft, and Russian Soviet foreign policy, and then I took another major, a second major in continental philosophy. So that's why I kind of key into some of this woke stuff. But on the government side, on the freedom and surveillance to what we're talking about, when I went over there, I thought, well, we're going to these former communist countries who were just 1990, early 90s, had just kind of communism had dissolved or had collapsed really, and these people were like had suffered under this system. And I thought, well, it'd be really interesting to talk to them and see what it was like growing up under that. And of course, it's the 1990s. It wasn't that long ago. It was like they're still kind of waiting for the dust to settle, and that's why this project was happening, was to help um, uh, transition them. And there were some people working on the economic side and some of them on the cultural side. I was on the cultural side. Um, so I was teaching at a university over there. Um, and, uh, and it was interesting to find out that as much as they hated the economic system of the communist economics, it was the mass surveillance that they were really bitter about, that they feared, they still feared. And because if everything you're doing is being recorded, logged, and scrutinized, and someone could go back and look at it, and wow, sounds a lot like social media these days, and the internet. Like, if you're being scrutinized constantly, and that there's somebody could be using it against you, and in a corrupt political system where freedom of speech doesn't really exist, where your civil rights are no longer aren't like ironclad, where you can be brought up on charges for saying the wrong thing. But worse than that, where it's not even out in the open. I'm not talking about like people getting arrested, but if you if you say the wrong thing and someone from the political office says, and you're up for a job or a promotion or a position to get into a program for education or anything, and they go, well, this you know in the former Soviet style, this person said the wrong thing, so they don't get to go, right? Like, and it's that simple, it's that easy. You were guilty of wrong speak, someone made a phone call to someone else or sent a message saying this person doesn't go forward.
That's right.
And that's where it gets very insidious, because you don't see it. It's the kind of, I call it the creeping hand of authoritarianism, and you don't see it but you feel it in your life, where people are being blocked from progressing, from being able to pursue their happiness, from being able to build their prosperity and to support their family, because someone didn't like the thing they said. And this isn't just a thing. Like, I was teaching, I taught a North American political history class to master students at a university over there, and they couldn't pick their own essay topics, right? Like, I was like, we're going to do essays, we're going to run this like a
That's happening now, by the way. I mean, I'm a tutor, and that's already well established. You can't choose your own books. You can't choose your own essays. I tutor a young man who attends a private school in Atlanta, Georgia, and his school is part of a debate league in the region, and they're debating climate, supposedly like climate change, but it's really the Green New Deal. And he showed me the evidence packet they were given. There is no counter argument. All of the arguments are in favor of the Green New Deal. They're just different arguments. And so the way the students win is who uses the arguments we gave you the best. So in
Right.
other words, whose style and whose presentation is the most persuasive, and who makes up the panel? They're not doing traditional debate scoring or with debate experts. The parents, like groups of parents and randos who are just listening to these kids rattle off. You've probably seen some of them on the internet where they're just like yelling arguments as fast as possible. And the more of them they use and the more, certain they sound. So essentially what they're doing is training these kids in struggle session and calling it debate.
Well, and they're giving them one side here, argue, like you said, argue multiple ways of proving the one story, the one party line, right? Toe the party line, show us the 10 different ways you could toe the same party line. And that's the system these kids grew up in that I was working with in the 90s. Whereas they're one party rule, nobody gets, here's what, and when I say that they couldn't pick their own topics, it wasn't that they weren't allowed to, well, they weren't allowed to, but they didn't know how to.
That too.
Right?
Yeah.
And I finally called them in. I said, guys, like, you haven't even come up with a thesis, let alone a topic. And they said, well, couldn't you just pick it for us and tell us what you want us to write? And right. And I said, well, why? They said, well, because that way, if somebody reads what we wrote and they think it's wrong or they disagree with it, we can blame it on you. And that way, like if we say the wrong thing, then maybe we won't get into our PhD program, or maybe we won't get a job we want in the future. And this all is all on a record. So this way, if we make a mistake, then we can say, well, the teacher told us to write this. And so this is how, again, this insidious thing about authoritarianism, right? Where you no longer have the freedom to think for yourselves, and you're always going to pass the buck up the line to the authority. Right? You let the authority tell you what to say, and then you can always you have the safety of being able to blame the authority. I was just doing what I was told. I was just repeating what I was told. And your whole brain shuts down. You can't have, and I said, oh, guys, look, communism is over. You're free now. You can make mistakes. You can say the wrong thing. It's okay. It's part of learning. Here I was telling them that it was okay. And then look, a couple years later, we're trying to install Stasi 2.0. All this surveillance crap that we want to put on everything, not just like your internet,
that's a great segue to like the thing I want to do, because we've now just been talking about, kind of like some of the effects, but my audience, as I said, I don't think they fully appreciate what surveillance is. I think a lot of times they see the word surveillance, they think camera, they think maybe audio device recording or something. Like they're picturing spy movies, television shows, secret police going in and planting bugs. And they forget that all of this technology that they're willingly using, like Facebook, exists for the sole purpose of surveilling. So can you talk to us about that? Like when you say surveillance, you mean?
Well, it's all of it. One of the things that came out around, you remember the Snowden thing 10 years ago now. Well, I guess 2013, I guess that was.
Yeah.
So, and they said, well, we're not keeping files and dossiers on people, right?
Yeah.
And because that was the sort of thing that, boomers and Gen X people sort of remember from, the spy, the FBI has a file on me, or the KGB has kept a dossier. And so they think in terms of like, there's a physical file, with all your information and photos of you, with your secret lover or whatever they can blackmail you with or whatever. Facebook, social media, the internet, Google, all these things, right? Especially social media, when they first launched, they were pursuing a business model that was very similar to like free newspapers. Remember free newspapers? There was a box on the corner in the city that said, free, and it had all this news articles in it. It was all supported by ads, right? Big classified section ads. And then social media came out and they did the same thing. We're going to be supported by ads. We're free to everyone. You can use your social media, and we're going to be supported by ads. And that seemed fine. Everyone was like, all right, I'll see some ads in the timeline. I'll click some things. And then those companies, went public and had huge incentives to start pushing for more money and more information. So all of a sudden, they said, no, 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 we're going to start mining all your details. All this information that you trusted us with, you plugged in your contacts from your phone and said, I installed the app and it asked me for all my contacts there. Now you know everyone I know. And so Facebook and so all these companies, probably all the people using Gmail. I mean, so now those companies have all your contacts, personal, business. They're seeing all of your potentially. I think when the Twitter files came out, did we not see like that they can see your private messages, your DMs on Twitter now? And I'm sure, there's talk about how much can the people at Google see, and all of these companies, Facebook or Meta or whatever they want to call themselves. So anyway, back to this dossier idea. When they said, well, we're not, and the government got all up in arms, or governments, I should say, because it's not just the United States government that was doing this, PRISM and all these programs. It's the Five Eyes. It's the United States, the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and a number of other countries that all these countries have intelligence sharing agreements with. They're all pushing for these things. A lot of the cases they're already doing it, and then they're pushing these laws so they can legalize it after the fact because maybe they want to do more of it. And so this idea of a dossier. Well, no, we don't keep a file on you. Oh, but you have my name, like everyone's name, or your name is anyone listening, they have your name. So, and they can press a button and link all that stuff. Instant file, right? That's the difference. They don't have to keep a physical dossier in a filing cabinet that they go look for.
It's semantics.
Yeah, it's weasel
We're
word.
not keeping a file on all of you, but we can make one in 5 seconds.
Yeah, instantaneously press a button, boom, it assembles all the information available on you, and there's a full file.
And the government doesn't need a warrant for it.
Well, this is where it gets. I was just reading about how there's this workaround. I think it was it Washington Post? Someone, Washington Post. If they want to get information on you, normally, traditionally, you'd have to be suspected of something, and they have to go convince a judge to issue a warrant, a search warrant or a surveillance warrant, so to put you under a watch. And the reason for that is what they call judicial restraint, right?
Right.
For anyone who doesn't know that, is so that it can't go on forever. The government can't be like snooping on your life, messing with you, because when you're being investigated, like it's not like this can be done without affecting your world, right? You're going to start wondering why there are people following you around. If they're questioning people in your life, people you do business with, that's going to affect your relationships, your business relationships. It's going to affect like your employer or your employees. Like all your relationships will be affected if people that in your life are being questioned about your activities, especially when they're being cryptic about it and saying, well, it's for national security, so don't ask the question. Exactly. And they're like, oh my God, is this person like a secret terrorist, right? Like,
exactly.
We have this
You'll instantly lose your job if you're under investigation.
Well, maybe not. They have to keep you employed because they don't want to tip you off, right?
Well, I suppose. It depends how open they are.
You're going to lose your credibility as a person. And you will eventually lose that job, probably because you're going to go insane from all the weird stuff happening in your life. And it's insidious. So the government, according to Washington Post here, says that, okay, we can't get a warrant for every little thing. Oh, sorry, just to finish that off, that thought about warrants. So after a period of time, you have to go back to the judge and say, here's what we're looking at. Here's what we found. Can you extend the warrant? And the judge might be like, you know what, you guys are fishing. No, cut them loose. Stop bothering this person, right? And that's part of why we have a system of search warrants and things like that, is to prevent them from just open-ended fishing expeditions and harassing people, right? And there are a lot of overzealous, I'm not saying they're bad people, but maybe they're overzealous, overeager people working in law enforcement and in government who are like, no, I'm convinced. And, they get kind of locked on to people. And we want to prevent that. So you have this second layer of judicial restraint, sober second thought, saying, hey, or if they, no, we found something, we suspect them. Right. And by the way, like going back to our, for the children thing, if there's ever any question of something bad happening to a child, most judges, and I've talked to a number of judges about this, and I know a lot of judges, I know a lot of lawyers and judges and people in law enforcement, and I've asked, And they're like, as soon as we hear the word that there might be a child involved, it's like, yeah, here you go, warrant, access, whatever. Like they don't, they're not this idea that it's hard.
Unless somebody whispers in their ear and tells them to stop looking into it, and we saw that in the movie about the child trafficking situation, where you had, actual well-intentioned people on the ground saying, "Just let me go investigate," like actually physically go, not
Mhm.
wiretap and all this kind of stuff, but I'm gonna physically follow a lead, and being told, "You're being pulled, you can't continue this investigation." So it works kind of both ways where, you know, if they do know something, they can stop an investigation that should happen.
Well, and
So
that's corruption, right? And that's where,
exactly.
and again, all these systems, when you give more surveillance powers, more of these extrajudicial, extra legal sort of powers to these bureaucracies, um, where they're no longer being, they don't have oversight, they don't have restraint.
Right.
You, what's the expression, right? Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts
That's
absolutely.
absolutely.
And
Yeah.
so you give these powers, you keep adding to all the powers of the state, and now you have unaccountable people in government, corrupt, maybe involved in not great activities themselves,
Mm.
and who are happy to cover things up. And that's what largely what happened in the Soviet system, right? Like it was
Yeah,
so
exactly.
corrupt that people, not only were they afraid to have thoughts of their own, like the students, the people who grew up under it, but they were afraid of being punished by a corrupt official, right? And if you didn't know the right person, if you didn't have the right connections to the political authority, you
Right.
wouldn't get that job and all that stuff. So everything becomes politicized. Everything becomes right, and we're seeing it more and more. Right, it's been how many years of this? 10, 20 years now of just since 9/11 was kind of when things went. I mean, sure. I mean, after 9/11, America got was justifiably angry, right?
Mhm.
And and people don't like it when I say this, but I'm like, the more of these programs that get installed, the more Osama is laughing from the grave. He's laughing because
100%.
his goal was they look it. The line, it's cliche, but they hate us for our freedoms, right? I know, so let's get rid of our freedoms. Let's build an authoritarian system where everybody's being watched and controlled, and everybody's scared, and no people are no longer out there. And sure, they're prudes and uptight sort of people who don't want anybody out there to go do things that they don't like, right? So they like, yes, let's clamp down on them, but they don't think about how it can turn back on them and bite them too.
That's right.
Um,
That is a time when everybody thought for sure this will only get the bad guys that we think are bad guys,
yeah,
and it never dawned on them that someday somebody would come up with a way for them to be the bad guys. The other thing that struck me, and I see this happening again today, we see it every time there's a school shooting.
yeah,
People say we need new kinds of background checks, and we need more surveillance in the schools, and we need this, we need that. And I think to myself, you haven't even spent 5 minutes unwinding this to figure out which of the many, many laws we have in place already did not get enforced. What the various appropriate means of surveilling, let's say, the student body or people purchasing guns or whatever, simply the ball just got dropped. And that was more true of 9/11 than anything I've seen in a long time. And even the 9/11 Commission pretty much reported that, well, these guys, the left hand didn't talk to the right hand. This person dropped the ball here. This person dropped the ball there. What we found was that all the things, the systems we had in place ostensibly to keep us safe did not function. And the response was, let's add another layer, not let's go clean house. Let's revamp our policies. Let's make sure the left hand can talk to the right hand going forward.
hmm
And then, well, we don't add any layers of costly bureaucracy. First of all, it's the cost, and then
yeah.
potential for corruption. And so people have this perception that more is better, more
And
equals
and
better.
that and that's a great point. I think I can't remember, was it Hayden or Alexander, that which general was it, the intelligence guys around during Snowden, and one of them had this, they said collect it all was their
Yes.
policy, right?
Yes.
And one of the problems with collect it all is that what you end up with is too much information. You end up with a bunch of noise that you can't sift through. And they're like, "Oh, AI is going to sort it out." Yeah, okay. Look what Gemini, what a mess that is. Like AI is not going to sort anything out. They're just going to have you chasing all the wrong people. because it's all biased and garbage. But this collected all, it creates a giant bureaucracy. So of course the people involved in that bureaucracy are incentivized to grow their bureaucracy, right? Because they that's how they make a living. Um, and and look how big that apparatus is, right? I think they call it the blob, the, this
Yeah,
big
the whole intelligence apparatus has so many layers that what was a mistake of the left hand not talking to the right, we now have an octopus
yeah,
that needs to,
and
all the tentacles need to talk to each other in order to to connect the dots. And what did we see? While it wasn't as big, certainly the subsequent attacks or attempted attacks, to my eyes
mhm,
and brain, represented bigger failures of communication than what happened on 9/11. So in other words, 9/11, they were very skillful. We don't give them enough credit. Everybody wants to think of them as these bumbling, camel jockeys or whatever. No, you don't give them enough credit for this level of sophistication relative to technology that they had, and the number of years they spent planning it, and the amount
mhm,
of money they had to spend on it. So that's why that was so successful. But subsequent attacks, it's not that they were small because we were so good at the surveillance. It's that they shouldn't have gotten as far as they got to begin with. But they did, because nobody could see it. When you unraveled each one of those in subsequent months and years, you're like, y'all missed this. And how many times has there been a shooting, especially in a public place, where somebody goes, oh yeah, they were on our radar. They were on our radar. Or the FBI had a file on this guy. The FBI was following this person. Or they had 17 police reports on them. And they're like,
well, and that comes down to, they say, well, then we need more resources, we need more agents, we need more this, we need more that. And I'm like, no, you're drowning in information.
that's
Those
right.
guys are on your radar, the people who are on your radar, we're going to be on your radar. But because you were busy looking into 1,000 other people who are completely over some political crap, over their opinions,
Absolutely.
over, oh, they drove a truck to the Capitol to protest the government, so we're going to put them under
Right.
investigation. I'm like, rather than spending
Yeah,
resources
missing the guy
investigating.
buying fertilizer and pressure cookers,
Yeah, yeah.
with
Oh,
like all kinds of radical ideas. No, we're going to follow the guy with too many American flags and a truck. And
right.
you're absolutely right. It's just, there's so much information, and people keep forgetting these people are people.
Hmm.
So, in other words, information is also only as good as the eyeballs and the brains analyzing the
Yep.
information. So when you take the best people on earth, overwhelm them with too much data, and you're going to have a problem. Take
Yep.
people who are not the best people on earth, or people who are biased, and we've seen this with police forces
Mhm.
since time immemorial. The more bad stuff you see, because hell, it's your job to just live in that space,
Right.
the more you overgeneralize that everything is bad, that people are bad, that there's something bad on the other side of that conversation, and you lack any objectivity whatsoever. So whether it's a
Yeah.
personal bias or it's a professional bias, because
Hmm.
all you ever see is bad stuff.
Yeah. I'd like to do that with judges and cops. I ask them what they think the crime rates are, whether they think the crime rates are up or down in the last 30, 40 years.
Yes,
And they're like, and because they deal with criminals and scumbags all day long,
all day.
they think that everybody's a perp, right? It's like the whole world's full of, and I'm like, actually, it's a whole lot better than it's crime rates are what their lowest since, other than some summer protest blips.
Yeah,
Um, they're at their lowest since the 70s. Like they've
right.
been dropping since the 90s. But it's one thing for these, let's say, police officers. That's a good example. To maybe be overzealous in their jobs, right? They're like, they see everyone as a perp, they treat everyone as a perp. So now the public, innocent people in the public, in their interactions with police, they're interacting with someone who's hostile and pushy and abusive, really. And so, of course, this does not look good on police forces. And then people complain and say defund and all this. Now the cops are upset because they don't feel appreciated. And it's like, well, there's this culture. I'd say since maybe the 90s, it's been like this neighborhood policing seems to have gone out the window. Not in every jurisdiction, but in a lot, especially major cities. To this, like, they're so they're overzealous. Maybe they're investigating people that don't need investigating, because they're just so convinced, they're so tunnel vision blind by their occupation. And that in and of itself is bad enough. because you're looking at basically people who are abusing their powers, right? These are people in law enforcement and in the intelligence world have been trusted with extraordinary powers,
Yes.
right? And we trust them with extraordinary powers under the belief that they're going to be doing good with them.
Mm-hmm.
They go out in the world, they wake up in the morning and think, I'm going to go out and do the good thing today. And so I don't even want to say like that they're bad people. There's a lot of good people, a lot of good cops, a lot of good people in the intelligence community who going out there to do the good thing. But if they're radicalized in some way, if they've got that occupational bias, that tunnel vision, and starting to just have this negative view of all of humanity, they're going to be abusing their access. They're going to be thinking that they're doing the good thing. That's not even counting the people who are going to be abusing it for their own gain, right? All of these systems, the more systems we create where people have unwarranted access, where people have extraordinary power without extraordinary oversight or restraints, like judicial restraint, operational oversight, review, the more they'll be abused. We was how over the last 10 years, like stories of police officers stalking their exes using surveillance stuff from surveillance equipment and access they have through their work to go after their ex spouse or the person who dumped them last week.
Right.
I mean, they're all human beings, and again, power corrupts. It's corrosive. Power is corrosive. It corrupts, and when you're not, and this again brings us back to the what we started with, the question of like what's going on in Canada. 10 years ago when they tried to push that national surveillance program, they had, you would think if the government was going to authorize a bunch of spying powers to themselves, right? We're gonna have all these we're gonna start our own police force. They were gonna call them inspectors,
Right.
and they had just abolished the inspector general of for intelligence, right? The person who's supposed to watch the watchers. They got rid of them. I'm like, wait a second. If you're asking for more powers, shouldn't you be saying, well, we're going to put more oversight to offset it, to balance it, to make sure it's not abused? Instead, they were like, no, 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 we want more powers and less oversight. We're going to get rid of that so we don't have anyone looking over our shoulder to see if we're abusing it. And I'm like, that seems to be a trend to me. That's like, let's get more powers and less oversight. The way they treat whistleblowers, right? Like Snowden, he says, I watched it being abused all the time. I ran it up the line to my higher ups and they said, shut up. I'm paraphrasing. I mean, people can watch the Snowden interview. It's, I think it's on YouTube still, or maybe at The Guardian, and you just sort of go, nobody wants to rock the boat. That's another issue too, with a lot of these bureaucracies, these information bureaucracies, I guess we could call them, is that everyone wants to cover their ass, right?
I think that's a feature of bureaucracy, period.
Right.
I mean, we saw that in Chernobyl. And you mentioned it at the outset of
Great
this show, where you mentioned being there with these former Soviet, these students, and how accustomed they were. Their brains were just rewired to do CYA rather than learn. And I think, we love to think we're so different than the former Soviet Union or China or North Korea or whatever, because we have regular electricity and shelves full of bread, okay, that we can just go and get without waiting in line. And we think that's it. See, that proves we're free. And we forget that your worldview, your attitude, your perception of self in the society in which you live is actually a better indication of how free you really are than whether you can do all these things. I mean, that's a function of other systems that we could talk about another day. But when it comes to surveillance, my opinion is, that you're being watched constantly if you default to CYA before what is true. And that's in your work environment. That's out walking down the street. You pass a cop. It's like what you're driving, like whatever you're doing. If your first thought is, how do I make sure that it's not on me or somebody else gets blamed or I'm in the clear?
Yeah. That's And we're seeing that already. We're seeing it already.
Yep.
So what we talk about, people being performative
Yeah.
on their social media, right? Look how virtuous I am.
That's why
And
they're doing it.
look at how awful those people over there are. And what they're doing, what they're saying really is, uh, hey, big brother, authority, government, people, powers that be, go bug them. Don't pick on
That's
me.
right.
Don't pick on me. And it's
100%.
fear. It's fear. It creates an atmosphere, an air of fear
Mhm.
throughout all of society. And I've held this idea, this view since my time in Eastern Europe,
Mm.
uh, that mass surveillance is sort of deleterious to the human psyche and
Yes.
to the social fabric.
Uh-huh.
What you get is, you don't get deterrence. You don't get people behaving more. What you get, they shut down. They shut down. Everyone becomes political, right? Politicized, and almost sort of cynical and scheming. Uh, when you believe you are being scrutinized and everyone is being scrutinized and they're watching,
You have no
and it's
trust for anybody.
no trust, because anything can be twisted, turned against you. So you're not going to stick your neck out. You're not going to try. You're not going to work hard. You're not going to be productive. And it takes about 2 or 3 generations, as we saw with the Soviets, for society to sort of grind to a halt. And I know, like, a lot of people like say America won the Cold War, and I'm like, well, won by being still standing, but it wasn't really a victory where it was like a knockout when you knocked down the Soviets. The
Yeah.
Soviets collapsed. They collapsed under the weight
Mhm.
of their own corruption, and the fact that people didn't care anymore. And you could go. I don't know. Now it's been a number of years since I've been over there, but in the 90s, you could look at what was built by the Soviets. It was crumbling, right? Stuff that had been, and this was in Central and Eastern Europe where I was, and
Yeah.
stuff that had been built centuries before looked better than what the Soviets, still was in better shape than what the Soviets had built, because nobody cared, nobody bothered, and when your economy is going to grind to a halt, your society is going to grind to a halt, because everybody suspects, distrusts, and basically hates everyone else. And
That's right.
that's the world you build. That's the culture you create when you impose a surveillance apparatus on everything. And of course, at that point, your only option is to more surveillance, right? More fear. Let's make them comply. And we see China doing that now with their social credit system,
Yeah.
where, like, they will incentivize them to behave, to be productive, by if you don't do the thing we want you to do, or if you say the wrong thing, do some wrong speak, now you can't buy a plane ticket, you can't travel on the weekend because you've got some demerit points on your social credit standing.
We
And
already have a no-fly list that include that people have had to spend years trying to get off of because there was a mistaken identity. Like their name was the same as somebody else's name and the system got it wrong.
I know somebody who got married, took her husband's last name, and because of that, she now had the name of someone on a no-fly list, or on a suspect list, and it wasn't even her. Totally different person, and like super common name. This is where it's incompetence also can cause problems, right?
Yep.
The people running these systems are not always not always competent people.
That's what I was saying. It's like, well, who are these magical angel perfect people that you're
Yeah,
getting to run these systems? And then
yeah,
whenever somebody brings up, let's put cameras in the classrooms and that's going to solve the issue with the porn. We're going to see them showing the kids porn. We're going to see them or
right.
hear them teaching woke ideas.
Teaching, yeah,
And I'm thinking to myself, like, well, first of all, we've already been gaslit up the wazoo. They've already lied to people about what's going on in the classroom. And
yeah,
you have no trust because they've lied. Also, they were hiding in plain sight because, over here they're lying, but over here they're telling the truth. You just didn't look over here.
right.
And your kids are already being constantly surveilled with all the one-to-one devices they're using. So you want to give the same government you don't trust. You trust them so little.
Yeah,
That's why you want the cameras, and you're going to give them the ownership of the cameras, of the recording devices, and you're going to violate. This is happening right now in Florida, David. Florida has a parental rights law that they passed. And part of the parental rights law is that the teachers not only have to disclose to parents when they go on field trip, all those things, but they cannot record the students' voices or faces. They can't do any kind of surveillance without parents' explicit consent for the individual child. That's even like above and beyond FERPA, what that has, which just says you can
mm,
access what we've recorded. Now, they have a bill, the same party The same political party that pushed for this parental rights bill is pushing a cameras and recording devices in the classroom bill that would violate the parental rights bill they just passed, because in order to collect, for example, audio, they want audio and visual in every corner of the classroom to pick up everything. Well, what are they going to blur all the faces of the people who didn't give consent? Or how are they going to identify in a conversation that's captured on audio? And this is presuming it's the best quality ever, which is very expensive. How, without voice recognition software parsing who said what in a yelling, heated debate about something, without all the consent of all the people? So guess what? They have to override that lack of consent in order to parse it out and get only the guilty parties. And the people who write these bills don't even realize it.
No,
They're just
those
like,
people
I'm
writing
a
these
lawyer,
bills.
I'm going to write a bill.
The people writing a lot of these bills are
They're not even lawyers. I'm giving them too much credit. They're not lawyers.
No,
they're politicians and
or
lobbyists.
they're people at some think tank or lobby group who want. Half of them are just like, we're writing this bill because we have the technology we want to sell. The bill's going to make possible. Right? A lot of it's self-interest.
That's it.
But you know, they want to record everything, and they think that'll protect my kid, right? And that's how they sell it to you, right? They protect. Think of the children. And it's giving this power, like, who has access to all this, right?
Thank you.
Right. And not to mention any digital information now, like with the advent of what they, deep fakes they call it, or you've seen the videos of like some guy, regular Joe Schmo talking, but he's got like Morgan Freeman's voice now.
Exactly.
Right. And you think that all this stuff isn't going to be very, very, very close to being indistinguishable from what was the real recording versus what was doctored or added in. You're literally just giving more and more and more. You're feeding more information into this machine where the technology now exists, or it's right around the corner to fake anything.
That's right.
Right. So you want to incriminate someone? Well, here's a recording of them speaking for 10 minutes on this topic, but we're just going to take all their voice samples and their face and like, right now, this is what we're doing right now, like, and we're gonna change it.
Well, what about the teachers? What about the few teachers left, and there's a few, who close the door and do what they want anyway? Meaning, and I'm not saying the bad stuff, the good stuff. They're like, I'm going to teach Thomas Sowell, screw this DEI crap. Now, they put cameras in your classroom, and what before you were able to like get away with because they weren't able to see and only the kids could hear you, whatever. And maybe the kids would rat you out. Maybe they wouldn't. Generally, they don't. Now it's much easier for the union, your principal, your DEI director, and everybody else to identify not just who are the last remaining teachers we need to sideline, put on administrative leave, investigate for wrong thing, but who are the kids agreeing with that teacher? And then who are their parents? Also, if you put in you put the camera up and then you're like, okay, the cameras have been up for 6 months. I want to watch some footage. So, I want to see what that teacher's doing in my kid's classroom, because for whatever reason, you don't trust your kid to tell you. So you go and FOIA this footage.
Well, and then you can cut it. You can edit it and cut it together to say all kinds of things. That's one thing that a lot of people don't realize, is that you could take like a footage of someone speaking on any topic at length.
We've seen it done.
And then cut it together, chop bits out, and all of a sudden have them saying the opposite of what they were saying. So this is going to lead to all kinds of mess. I think this cameras in the classroom is really a horrible idea, mainly because of the damage it's going to do to people's children. People know it's to keep them safe. I'm like, no, it's not going to keep them safe. It doesn't keep them safe at all. That's a total nonsense.
Look how they behave already with these cameras in the classroom.
Yeah.
They all got one of these in their pocket, and they've all got a one-to-one device. So somebody could take something here in the bathroom, and then 5 seconds later, it can be on everybody's Chromebook all across the school in the Google Classroom. They can drop it in.
Now, here, and there you go. That actually brings up a really good point. They want to put all these cameras in the classroom, surveillance systems. We're going to record everything everybody does everywhere all the time. Right?
Yep.
Or, hear me out, much simpler. Put parental controls on every device.
That's right.
right? Your kid gets a cell phone, they're under 16 or whatever. Give the parents the right to block all of the internet except for the following websites, to make it they can't send images off their phone except to the parents.
Yep.
Or
We already
or
have that power.
right?
Parents
So
just don't avail themselves of it.
but promote it, push it, right? No, no, no. Again, parents don't avail themselves of it because how many of them know about it now? And then you have some other parents who are installing spyware on their kids' devices so they can snoop on them on their computers. There was that one girl who went off to university. Her parents had bought her a new laptop, and they found out and they had installed spyware on it so they could keep an eye on her. And that's where it gets creepy, right? If you're doing that, if like limiting what your child can access by blocking it on their device, that makes sense. That's
Right.
sensible. That's reasonable. That's within a reasonable bounds. If you're spying on your kids are going to grow up to never trust you. They're
That's
going
right.
to resent you because anyone who's been spied on or who believes they've been spied on, forget whether they have or not. If you believe you have been spied on, you're going to resent the people who did it. And so
That's right.
that's what this culture creates. Um, so there's other ways of achieving these goals of keeping kids safe, like with the classroom thing. Instead of installing a whole bunch of camera gear and all this recording stuff, again, expensive, useless flood of information, and once you have all that material, easily abused that information and recordings of your children, which, by the way, nothing is safe.
Because there's no sexual predators in schools.
Yeah,
I mean, come on. It's not like
right.
every day they aren't finding a new one. Somebody sent me a list yesterday. She set up an email alert
Hmm.
for the, when in her district, when somebody was identified as a predator and, in the school.
In the school, right?
It says not a day goes by.
A
Not a
teacher,
day.
a
I
staff
got a
member, somebody. Yeah,
list
yeah,
this long that she sent me, like screenshots and screenshots. So people go to the target rich environment. Now give them access to footage
yeah,
of
right.
people. Like, what are you gonna do with pictures of kids in the classroom? Like, oh, you have no idea the creepiness of people.
So
So
if you want to monitor or you want to know what's going on in the classroom, what they're teaching your
yeah.
kids, right? It's very easy to say, all right, parents, if you have a child in this school, you can arrange with the principal and you could even make it a policy that the principal knows, but the teacher doesn't, right? That the teacher could be teaching a class and be not informed that there's going to be a sit-in, right? Have a parent. And if you can't
Well,
make it,
in the United States, they don't allow that anymore.
well,
And
and
that's one of the problems of why people are asking the cameras. But you know what would solve that, David? Return to paper and pencil and textbooks.
mhm,
So if the having the devices facilitates the teacher communicating directly with the student without the parents really knowing, they put it behind a separate login.
mhm,
And then sometimes they leave the device even at school. So they can't bring the device home. So everything is happening electronically. The kid brings no artifact back home
yeah,
about what's going on. When we had textbooks and folders and papers and pencils, and a syllabus, everything came home and it's like, oh, this is what you're learning. And here, look, oh, the notes match the syllabus, match the thing. And we, our parents, to be an involved parent, it was to open up your notebook and be like, can I take a look?
yeah. You can
I want to,
physically see the
you
thing that
can
they're working on.
physically see what's going
Yeah,
on. You look at the books that they're assigned. You physically, now I have parents, whistleblowing parents, who've made themselves into hackers. They've turned
yeah.
themselves into like,
And
I
to
got to
find out,
spy on everything to find out what's going on in my kid's school. It's
yeah,
taking them hours and hours out of their day, never mind their
mhm,
week, just to figure out what's going on in the kid's school. And my comment always is, if you mistrust your school that much, if you have to add, it's a second job for you from 8 o'clock at night until 2 in the morning. This is when I get whistleblower stuff. It's like 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning. Look what I found. Look what I found. I'm like, you're turning yourself into the CIA.
yeah. And this not healthy for these
Oh,
parents
these
who are already
parents are having
exhausted.
nervous breakdowns. I'm
Yeah,
like,
because they have their I need to find out what's going on with my kids
pull
in their
your kid
school.
out.
Yeah,
Get him out. If this is like, imagine voluntarily sending your offspring, your loves of your life.
yeah,
Okay. Like you're invested your whole everything into it, money, time, love, all of it. And you send them to an environment you mistrust so much. You're spending 3, 4, 5 hours a day
yeah.
trying all kinds of sneaky ways to snoop around on their teachers and their social media and this and that, just to figure out what the is going on in the classroom. And then you get to a point of you say, I want Stasi. Give me Stasi. I
Yeah.
want the government to do it. The government I mistrust that is doing it to me, please have them go spy on my kid.
Well, and that right there, right? It's like, well, let's put everybody under everything, and they'll all behave. And the problem is, no, what'll happen is whatever the government's current political line is what's going to end up happening.
And
It's
we'll
not
get
that people,
entrenched.
right? Yeah, they're gonna it'll and part of the problem too is that we know that there are a lot of activist teachers now, right? The education system is rife with them.
What more do we need to know? Like, what are you
Right.
going to see that's going to make all the difference?
Well, so they're not even really, they're not focusing on teaching as much as maybe they should. And again, like, putting cameras in the classrooms, is that going to solve that? Oh, well, I don't want my kids being taught all this, whatever, whether it's a bunch of woke crap over here, or if it's a bunch of the teachers who got religious ideas, and it doesn't matter. Whatever it is, you're a parent, you don't want your kid being indoctrinated with any ideology, whatever ideology it may be. You just want them
Exactly.
to learn reading, writing, arithmetic, the basic education, so they can maybe learn how to think for themselves.
Right.
Is surveillance going to be what stops it? No, especially if the surveillance systems and the dominant culture at the education institution and in government is ideological, and we're seeing that, right? That's part of the frustrations of a political system, is there's always this back and forth, this tug of war between different ideas and different ideologies, and who's in power this week, and 4 years of this, and I've got to get rid of this week, and then it's the other ideology. So anybody who's voting or supporting giving government more access, more power,
Right.
because, well, we're in power now, so we could pass these laws. Or we've got all the seats, we got all the votes, we got all the representatives, so we can pass it through, whether it's American Congress or British Parliament, Canadian Parliament, whatever. We'll pass it, and then, a couple years later, we got kicked out of power because the people were sick of our crap. They voted in the other guys, and now they have those powers, and they're enforcing their ideology and pushing the things that I don't like. Right. And I can't say boo about it because I supported this surveillance program.
Well, and the only thing that changes
Mhm.
is who's who's behind the stuff. The stuff stays. So
Mhm.
you have conservative Republican George Bush
Mhm.
puts in the Patriot Act. It's
Mhm.
supposed to sunset, but it doesn't. And he's followed by Barack Obama, who not only implements a bigger surveillance state than we've ever seen ever
Mhm.
in the United States, even going back to world wars. But he does it on the backs of something put in by a Republican that
Yeah.
Republicans cheered for and said, this is great. And then when Obama was busy, like writing people up and arresting people and dragging
Mhm.
people who disagreed with him before committees and stuff, oh, what a terrible tyrant. And
Republicans
then,
didn't like that very much.
no.
Right.
And
But
then he's
they,
followed by Trump. Now, did Trump remove any of it? Did he manage to? And they're like, well, the Congress. I'm like, guys, you're missing the point. The point is government programs that get implemented that give the government power are not party dependent. That's irrelevant. It's like your party puts it in, it's going to be. It's not it might be. It is going to be implemented by people you don't like if an election goes a different way. And because power corrupts, as you pointed out, power is just going to facilitate the people who are the most power hungry. Chances are increasingly you're not going to like them less and less and less, and regardless of what letters after their name. And this is where I feel like we are now, where you've got the so-called independents making up the largest party in the United States. People are unhappy on both sides. But what do you guys got? Do you got nothing, because by going this way and then that way and then this way and then that way, and each time giving them more and more power, same in education. So, Carter puts in the Department of Education, but on his heels, did Reagan, like, 1 year? The thing is in its cradle.
Mhm.
Kill it. Nope,
Yeah.
didn't kill it. Works a deal with what was it, Yeltsin or Brezhnev or one of those guys that, like, oh, well, no, it was Port Weinstein guy, Gorbachev.
Mhm.
We know that we're gonna, yeah, we'll share information for education and science and whatever. We'll do it through the Department of Education. Oh, that was a genius idea. And So that thing becomes bigger, more entrenched, farther reach. Suddenly we have money tied to performance. Suddenly we have all these things. The unions get stronger. So
Yeah.
everything that we see now that we're complaining about, you can't just say, well, it was the left that did it, or it was the right that did it.
No.
It was like, no, guys, it was power that did it. And
Yeah.
you ask, when you, the people, ask the government to become bigger and more powerful, they said, okie dokie.
Yeah.
They don't care if it's conservative, liberal, blah, 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 blah. That is a false.
So much of this stuff is, I mean, yes, there is a need for some amount of governance. I mean, the hardcore libertarians are like, get rid of it all. And, you know, fine, you know, that's silly too. But
And who's protecting those rights you're so fond of?
right.
The
But
rights respecting government. I'm an objectivist. A rights
yeah,
respecting government is essential.
right. But building these giant unaccountable bureaucracies,
Yeah.
it it's not going to end well.
No.
This sort of major social impact, we're seeing it already. I mean, things have just become more and more polarized.
Yeah.
People are trusting each other less and less. There's less community. There's less know your neighbor. There's less know the teachers at your school. There's like, well, we don't interact socially as physical persons in our world as much as we used to, because, well, now we have social media. And I was on my friend's Facebook. I saw what they did the last few weeks, so I've caught up with them. I'm like, you didn't even talk to them. You
Nope.
you think you've socialized, but you haven't. You think you've interacted with another human being, somebody you care about, who's your friend or your relative, and you really
Exactly.
don't. And without that, and a lot of this is doing this digital world, and some of it's fine, some of it's great, but some of it is replacing the social fabric of our communities, of our
Absolutely.
friendships, of our families. And it's that basic human social fabric that makes you safe. That
Exactly.
because you know your neighbor, you know the teacher, you can have a conversation with these people. And people are, heck, now people are so unaccustomed to human interaction that you can't even phone them without texting them first. The millennials and Gen Z kids, apparently, oh, if you don't text me or email me, you just phone me out of the blue, that's gonna give me a nervous
If you
breakdown.
use punctuation, you're being aggressive.
Right.
Don't put a period at the end of your text, because then you're like hurting me.
I'm
And
gonna
and that's, we talked about the harms bill, the online harms bill.
mm,
We've got a generation coming up right now that thinks that a period at the end of the sentence is harmful to their feelings. They think that certain kinds of discipline,
mhm,
that what we grew up with as appropriate boundaries between
mm,
adults and children and us
yeah,
making decisions, right, they call that harm.
yeah. They don't
Everything
know,
is harmful.
I you know,
There's
remember
a
the old
story.
line you always used to hear back in the day. It's like, quit your crying or I'll give you something to cry about. Every parent back in the day. And maybe that's a little much, but we've gone way too far in the opposite direction of
Right.
like, oh, you used punctuation I didn't like, or you called me a name, or you didn't use the pronoun that I prefer, and I'm harmed by that. I'm sorry, no, you're
Yeah.
not.
There's
You
seams on the bottom of my socks, mom. I'm going to have a temper tantrum. I mean,
yeah.
there was an article in today's Free Press,
Mhm.
and the woman is talking about how gentle parenting is, harm kids, and example she gives is about anorexics, and they're taught in their therapy and all the therapy that they go to, whatever, that and then the parents take them home, they have to like scratch out all the nutrition information on all the things in the pantry, and you have to like hide nutrition information on menus. And this girl she's now an adult, talking about how for the longest time she was insufferable. She would go to public places. It says skinny latte. That is triggering. How horrible of you to do this, whatever. And
So they're
pitch
being
it.
hypersensitized, radicalized, basically, to
Absolutely.
get freaked out about everything.
And what got her out
Yeah.
of it, what finally cured her, was not all the therapy of telling her like, oh, protect yourself and wrap yourself in bubble wrap.
Mhm.
It was an aunt who said, I like to have a conversation with your eating disorder and tell it to shut the,
Right.
like,
Yeah.
this is where the sort of like tough love, still saying you can do anything, you can do this, and I'm not taking no for an answer, and I'm sick and tired of this, I can't, and this and that
Yeah.
and the other. That's how you and I grew up,
Yeah.
was can't, never could, and I don't want to hear it. You didn't even
Mhm.
try, and
Yeah.
so on. And we were, it was like you didn't get to walk around and go, you're abusing me by having expectations of me.
You'd get, um Yeah, that kind of behavior was basically unacceptable to everyone, including
Totally
the other
unacceptable.
kids back then. And now they're like, "Oh, you poor little thing," and we're gonna call what's the coddling of the American mind, that the book,
That's right.
and they say, coddling kids, coddling people. I mean, there's one thing to have compassion and patience.
Right.
Some people struggle.
It's
Fine.
not compassionate to coddle, though.
No, when you're coddling somebody, you're enabling their
That's
sort
right.
of increased neurosis, their neurotic reactions that are unreasonable, that are um, harmful to themselves,
Right.
right? And
Now hand these people
mhm,
surveillance apparatus.
right, because that's who's going to be running it in the next few years,
People
right?
forget that. We
Yeah,
look at kids today and we like imagine they're always going to be small, and those kids like what's just mildly annoying in, a 5 to 10-year-old becomes borderline insufferable in a
yeah.
teenager. But now take that narcissistic, hypersensitive control freak
Hmm.
and hand them the keys to the kingdom, because that's all there is. Like
Yeah.
there isn't a large enough population of sensible, well-adjusted adults that grew up that way, and now put them in charge of running your life, 60-year-old, 70-year-old, whatever. And this is what I am trying to get
Yep.
across to people about this whole surveillance, and what you've just said about it's not going to make the kids not only not safe, it's going to contribute to their maladjustment to reality.
Well, because they're gonna resent all the scrutiny, right? And B, the people going into the who are going to be running those systems, right? With this whole idea in
Yeah.
the last few years, this bring your whole self to work, right? Bring your activism to your job, right? We saw it with the Twitter files. And if that
Yep.
was just Twitter was just one company, right? How many of the thousands of people Elon fired from Twitter, how many of those parallel people are at Google, are at Facebook, are at your bank, are
Yeah.
working government, are working for the intelligence agencies? Like, how do they vet people now, right? Do they vet people like, well, we don't want anyone who's too ideological, or has that shifted because of all the DEI stuff? Like, no, we want people who are ideologically
That's right.
conformist to our new program. Or when there's a conservative government, more conservative government, we want people who are religious fundamentalists because we think they're moral, right? Like this idea of neutrality, ideological neutrality and balance,
Yeah.
um, has been thrown out the window. Those ideals that we should strive to be impartial and fair. Um, you know, everyone knows that it's never 100% fully achievable, that all human beings are flawed, but isn't it good to have at least that as a goal to strive towards, to be as good as you can be in that direction? No, that's in the last decade or so, I think uh common consensus has been like, let's throw that out the window, and on the left and the right. So what
Yep.
you have is people going into these apparatuses, these systems where they have all these powers, they're being granted, you have access, and now they're in a position to enact social justice, to
Yeah.
perform their activism, to do their moral duty to society. And what does that mean? That means they're going to be abusing these systems. They're going to be abusing those powers.
Right.
And those snowflake kids who are so coddled and triggered are going to be now the next generation running these things. And they're going to be running them according to their hypersensitivities. They're
Well,
going to be
and
like,
we
"Hmm,
we already have ways of separating people with the intersectional stuff, with the oppressor, oppressed, and by race. And we just saw Ben Shapiro did a thread yesterday about
hmm,
what's going on in the medicine.
hmm,
And
yeah,
somebody put out these videos of people saying, well, we've changed our hiring criteria. We've gotten rid of these metrics, and we've gotten to doing more with the person and their interests and all, like you're talking about surgeons here. So we're already filtering people through this lens of identity. And then that's going to hedge further against ideological impurity, because anybody who would be okay with that and comfortable applying for a job and being like, oh, that's wonderful, I'll be considered now. If I were applying to college today, it'd be like, not you, not you, there are all these colleges I wouldn't even apply to, because I don't want to go through that filter. I don't agree with that philosophy. But any student, and you have to be living under a rock not to know that they're using this filter. Any
yeah,
student goes, nope, I still want to go to Harvard. Okay, so you're hedging. You're going to filter out for ideologies who's applying. Now we hedge a little bit more because the preferred identities are going to be the ones getting in.
hmm,
And then once they're in, now we put them in charge of the systems that oversee everybody else, whether it's in medicine, law, et cetera, and so forth. The people who graduate from these institutions and come out of these credentialing processes are going to be the so-called leaders and movers and shakers of the future. So when parents tell me, well, it's gonna be okay because, and look, I'm a homeschooler, but I'm homeschooling and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. I'm like, your child is still going to have to grow up in this world run by these people. So A, you do have skin in this game, first of all. So you can't just go hide out in your little cabin.
Yeah.
Secondly, you know, you got to understand the mechanisms, like how this works, that even if your kid someday, you know, so people tell me, oh, I homeschooled and I'm only going to send them to high school, or I homeschooled and I'm only going to send them to college, but they're going to be so rock solid, they're going to get to college, everything's been fine. I'm like, okay, but they're going to censor themselves. They're going to have to, because if they don't, and how many college students are reporting now, what crazy high percentages, well north of 60, 70% are reporting that they have self-censored on at least one occasion in a college classroom.
Yeah.
Well, they're self-censoring. The Soviet is here.
It is. And it's, you know, having watched having met with and worked with in an academic setting, kids who grew up in that system, and seeing what it did to them intellectually, and their ability to just even discuss the politics of the day, that issues that affect them and the world. Just even like, because I told them you could write about anything you want, right? It was super open.
They're like doe-eyed. What?
They're like, yeah, okay, no, just tell us what we need to say. Tell us what we need. Tell us what to say. Tell us what to write. Tell us what to think.
Well, they don't even know what they want, David. And I can kind of relate to this a little bit. And anyone in the audience who's ever been in a narcissistic relationship, like where a narcissist was kind of in charge of your life to any degree, one of the things that happens to you, and it takes a frighteningly short amount of time, is you don't know what you want. When you're finally free, you don't realize it when you're in it, but then you're free.
Is scary, right?
You go to, I went to the store for the first time when I got out of my abusive relationship. I went to the store to buy some clothes. And it sort of dawned on me that I could purchase whatever I wanted. And I didn't have the fear of somebody going, take that back, or why are you wearing that? That doesn't look right, whatever. And I remember standing there in the store and being frozen because I just had no idea what I wanted. I had this filter so I called a friend. I felt like, I was like, I'd like to call a friend. So I called a friend of mine and I said, you got to help me pierce the bubble. Like, help me. I don't know. What do I do? Like, I'm embarrassed. I'm in my 40s and I don't know how to like choose my own stuff. And she kind of like, I felt like I had to have a human being kind of remind me of this and talk me back into the world. Now that I was an adult, I had reason on my side, all this. So we're talking about a short period of time that this happened. And then I had to come out of it. Imagine spending your formative years. Imagine being in school, then university and all this. And you come out. I'm not surprised at these university students that were looking at like anything I want. It's not just a CYA. I don't know. I wouldn't even know how to formulate a question.
Well, they're afraid of making the wrong decision.
Yeah.
Because they don't know how to make decisions. And I think that's really what it comes down to, is when, and a lot of the idea that everything's being watched, that everything's being controlled by some bigger power, right? I don't know, like the people, the political left believe that, well, this way we can enforce our ideology and our ideas and make sure everybody uses the right words that we've decided are the good words, and then they don't use the words that we've decided are the wrong words and the wrong speak. And then on the political right, it's like, well, religion is no longer widespread, so we need to put the fear of something into everybody, so they'll all behave because they think everybody is gonna misbehave if they're not.
Right. Godless heathens have no morals.
And what this all comes down to, exactly, right? And what it all comes down to for both left and right is they want to know that there's someone watching everybody else, and that way it'll make them feel safe. Sure. Right? So as much as the right likes to point the finger at the left and say, them and their safetyism, right? Well, I'm sorry, the political right does it too, with all their like, we're gonna tough on crime this and la la la. I'm like, look, I'm all for like, let's make stealing and murder and violence illegal. Yeah. We shouldn't be just seeing like free for all, which we're seeing the effects of that these days. But I'm talking like this this creeping hand of Big Brother is going to solve our problems by we'll know what everyone's doing at all times, and they'll know. And if they don't want to get investigated and have their lives ruined by the state, they'll behave. And I'm like,
Right.
well, guess what? The other team is going to be enforcing their rules through that system too, and you're not going to like it.
Exactly.
Um, or or maybe we can not put the whole world under the whole of society under surveillance, not teach kids to be unable to make their own decisions, not make everyone resentful of everyone, and
Exactly.
especially government, right? Like no one, like like just it's commonplace now. Like don't trust the government because it's all corrupt. Why do we think it's all corrupt? Are most government people corrupt? No, probably not. But we view it as corrupt because they have unaccountable powers. And that's to me a definition of political corruption that people miss. They think it's all about, well, someone's lining their pockets. That's political corruption. Or
Right.
and I view um, abuse of power as a form of corruption in
Mm-hmm.
politics and governance.
Sure.
And we see that uh, sort of this view, this belief among the populace, among the people, that well, they do what they want. They push us around. We have no power. We have no say. We don't do it. So people become more dejected. Like they don't feel empowered to run for political office, to get involved in civic affairs. Some people do, but they
Right.
want to do activism,
Right.
um, and which is fine. But there's this general sense of powerlessness, um, and resentment that comes along with it. And I think that's the part of a big thing that it's hard to quantify that. It's hard to say, to measure that. And I say, the how do you measure the social fabric?
Yeah.
How do you measure social trust? Right? What is a high? How do you build a high trust society? You see people talking about low trust society, high trust society all the time. How do you build a high trust society? Well, you don't build one by making everyone resent everyone else and making everyone resent uh, the people in government.
Well, surveillance also is a way of saying you're all guilty until proven innocent.
100%.
I mean,
But
even when we gave cops their body cams, the impetus for that was we're gonna assume that y'all were too overzealous or violent or whatever, unless you have the recording to show you weren't. In other words, it's not like we
yeah,
look to the body cams to show us, what a great job the cops are doing. We're
mm,
looking to find evidence that to either like exculpatory evidence that they're innocent of any accusation or to prove that they follow procedure. It's you're guilty until proven innocent. I just saw the other day a story here in the United States that scared me because it said, I think Congress votes to halt funding. Like I didn't know the funding existed in the first place, temporary or suspend funding temporarily for a program that was researching precog, where they basically want
yeah,
to use AI
hmm
using predictive algorithms with all this data they're collecting from
yeah,
us to figure out who's likely to commit a
yeah.
crime, to
That's
start investigating us in advance. And then we have to worry, as you said, about who defines harm, who's going to define what likely to commit a crime looks like and what crimes are when it's not literally like murder, stealing, whatever. So we've been funding this research into precog minority report come to life.
yeah,
And I just think that the high trust society is the one that says you're innocent until you're proven guilty. You are responsible for your own behavior. So no more see they were mentally ill. They couldn't help it.
mhm,
Some people legitimately are mentally ill, but if every time somebody behaves in an aberrant manner,
mhm.
if our reaction is see our country as a mental health crisis. How about that person did a horrible thing?
Sure.
Or this is the way this kind of person behaves. That's not a high trust society. High trust societies hold individuals accountable. They treat people as innocent until proven guilty. They follow the laws that are rights respecting. So we were a high trust society. You
And
just walk outside and just be like, hey,
vigilantism is frowned upon,
yes,
right? That's part of it too. Is this idea that
yeah,
all this activism, everyone's an activist, right? We're going
I'm
to go out.
holding you accountable.
Yeah, because again, they want to show to the state, to the public, to everyone around them, to their family, friends, how virtuous they are, how good uh, uh, and so they'll go out and abuse somebody that they just decide is guilty of something,
Right.
because
Exactly.
there's no innocent till proven guilty with
Nope.
vigilantes. And
People,
I don't mean vigilantes like Batman going and beating up the
no.
Joker. I'm talking about social justice activists, or um, conservative activists too, going after certain people. This whole cancel culture, which happens on both the right and the left,
Yes, it
um,
does.
going after people's livelihoods, going after people's reputations because they uh, did some wrong speak, or they believe or they criticize the wrong thing, or they have the wrong beliefs, and you
Or
know
they just disagree.
they just disagree,
So
and it's
again, this is like
yeah.
the latest tactic is,
Mhm.
let's say, and I see this a lot on the, because this is the sphere in which I operate. This the people that are called anti-woke. I don't like that
No.
term. I like to say pro-human, pro-reason,
Yeah.
pro-heterodoxy, whatever. But working in that side, I've now seen this new trend is to have differences of opinion of how somebody is handling it, or what messages they're bringing,
Yeah.
and to attack that person and say, as you pointed out, oh, so you're anti-cameras, you're pro porn in the classroom. I'm like, I'm sorry, what?
Well, and that right there, that's a perfect example of it. And I saw that literally this morning while I was having my first sip of coffee and doom scrolling on the internet. Somebody criticized like this online harms bill, and immediately it said like, we don't need this. We already have laws in place for this, and why do they need all this extra powers? Oh, you must want to put porn in front of children, right? And it was like, this is the type of discourse, right, that is in our activism on the right and the left, both, right? You dare to even question a proposed law that's has massive overreach, you must be one of the criminals. You must be in. So what you have is people are making criminal aspersions about people who are their political rivals, or people who are critical of some law, and and in a world of the internet where the internet, kind of like the joke, the internet's forever, right? And uh if someone's not only could it put you on radar, but it just someone's publicly openly saying that you support the criminals, right?
Right, right.
um in a world that's scrutinized, recorded, that reputation
Yeah,
becomes important, all even more important. You can no longer just say, look, I live in my little town, leave me alone, right? Oh, well, you didn't support this thing. And it's not even, did you criticize it? You didn't support it. Remember
yep,
during certain protests, which we don't need to name, if you
exactly.
failed to show support for it, then they automatically said, you didn't put the symbol on your social media. You didn't do the thing. You
Right,
didn't wear the armband
right. And that's
to
why they
show your
name things.
allegiance, huh?
They name things that linguistically,
Hmm.
they'll give something a name that makes it harder to critique or oppose or whatever, because it's baked in the name. So that particular protest that you're talking about,
Yeah,
oh, so you don't think that these lives matter, right?
yeah.
Well, now in the United States, we have school choice is the big thing on the right. Oh, it's going to save everybody, school choice. And there's me saying like, no, it's not. You're just moving the government power more into the private sector. And that's a little thing we used to call fascism, but I guess that's out of fashion now.
Yeah,
And
it's
you say that it's like, so you don't want parents to have options? And I'm like, what? Now, the people you taught over in the former Soviet Union,
yeah.
if they might not have even understood the question, but use your imagination. Do you think that their parents, for example, if they had had an option as the Supreme Soviet was coming into being, or was
Mhm.
saying like, we take our children, put them in our schools, if they had had one exit door that was like, I'm not going to send them to those schools, I'm going to keep them at home and teach them at home, and if that exit door still existed, how many of them do you think in retrospect would have walked out like in 2 seconds? I'm saying
Well,
before they were sucked into, what
well,
it became.
in this sort of former and I was in the bloc, not directly the Soviet Union, but the the problem is in a totally surveilled society in which they lived, even if you had that option, right? If you even you could take your kids out of school and homeschool them, that would immediately get you put on a list. You would immediately
Right.
become suspected of uh,
Right.
dissent or sedition or something.
Right.
So that's immediately puts a red flag on your file.
But if
Uh,
there'd been like a sliver of a window of an
mm,
opportunity to build critical mass
mhm,
before that apparatus was fully implemented.
mhm.
So, in other words, if it was like, all right, guys, we got like 5 minutes. If the majority of us leave, then we are bigger than they are. And they, like put us all
Sure,
in a. So, I mean,
sure,
I'm just saying from their own point of view. And the reason I'm asking, of course,
yeah,
is that's where we are now in America. We're at 12:55 p.m. I mean, or sorry, no, not sorry,
11:55. Yeah,
11:55 p.m.
yeah.
So midnight is coming.
Late in the 11th hour, right?
Right. It's
The
coming.
doom clock.
The doom clock, and you got 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And when these kinds of surveillance bills and as the last thing I want to talk about is I do want to talk about that Five Eyes thing.
Mhm.
Um, when these things become reality, if they win on whether it's cameras in the classroom or some other form of, I don't think they're going to do that. I think what they're going to do is have all the surveillance be through the one-to-one devices. But regardless, when that becomes a reality and kids are wearing wearables to track their sentiments like they
Mhm.
are in China, then the door will be closed. When school choice is implemented and when the surveillance state is fully implemented also for our own good, their homeschool will either be outlawed because there won't have been a critical mass to keep it
And they,
legal,
yeah.
or we'll all be in a list
Well,
because we're
yeah,
still this much.
they can't surveil you in your home. Maybe they can. I mean, I remember when it was really creepy that uh in just before Snowden, right? When Snowden blew the whistle on so much of this stuff, I remember like I was like, why are video games that aren't even online video games? They're
Yeah.
not. You're not playing online. But why are they? Why won't it let me play the game in the non-online version without a connection to the internet?
Yes.
Right? Like why are we being pushed, nudged to always have our devices connected at all times? Where we
Yeah.
store all of our data. Everyone, well, put it in the cloud. Put everything you have in the cloud, and then the cloud gets hacked, right? And one of the issues here is, and yeah, so you can't surveil the home classroom, but you can if you have access to all the cell phones that are sitting in your living room, and
Uh-huh.
your TV has a microphone, and Alexa's sitting on the counter, and you've got all these devices that are microphone enabled. I
That's
mean,
right.
that's the one thing Snowden warned us about, whatever 10, 11 years ago, was that it's all there. It's all ready
It's
to be
already
built.
done. Yep.
They just need the authorization to press the button and turn it on,
That's it.
right? And it's he called it turnkey totalitarianism, and that's what a lot of these laws that they're pushing are about. A lot of this stuff is like, we're already doing it, or we already have the capability. We just want to put it in the law that we're allowed to, with
Right.
impunity, right? That you can't complain about it because it's now been legalized.
Right.
You talk
Do
about.
you
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, you mentioned the word nudge, and you said that we're being, nudged to use our devices more and more to the point where it's like we can't function if we
Mhm.
don't. Like they've built
Yeah.
the society such that it's like you can't access your
Yes.
prescriptions, you can't do anything.
Right.
Well, do you think that on the flip side that some of the sort of Marxian, chaos and, we're not going to enforce shoplifting rules anymore. We're gonna, like creating this kind of sense of danger, chaos, the reporting on, whatever it might be, even though actual crime rates are down, or it's so scary.
Yeah.
Do you think that we are being nudged to ask for more of the same?
I think I don't know if the some DA in some city or some state government or wherever, or jurisdiction government, saying we're not going to prosecute petty crimes and that creating a crime wave. I don't know if it's. I wouldn't go so far as to think that it's coordinated, but I think what there is there's always opportunism, right?
Mhm.
Like for instance, Joe Biden likes to brag about how he wrote a draft of the Patriot Act back in 1996, right? And you know what? I'll believe him, right? Because
I
that
bet
guy's
he did.
well, he has been very authoritarian in his views forever. for his whole political career. I mean, there's footage. People show the quotes of him talking about like the super predators and the youths, the young male urban youth, and you're like, this guy's not. He's got a very negative view of people, of humanity, and he's very much a creature of the establishment. I mean, my view. I think the reason he was ticketed with Obama was to basically be his handler. To make sure the young upstart politician who said he was going to put a muzzle back on the intelligence community didn't do those sorts of things. That he behaved and didn't mess with the establishment. But no, like, if you worked on a draft of the Patriot Act in 1996, and it existed, and did you notice how quick it like this giant, massive, all-encompassing law all of a sudden appeared out of nowhere? They already had it written.
Yep.
And this is not, it's not just the Patriot Act, and this is in all the Five Eyes countries, which I know we want to get to. There are laws sitting there, like, hey, whatever side anyone's on with the Roe v. Wade thing, various states all around the place had legislation just waiting, ready to go. Same thing with a lot of this intelligence stuff, the surveillance stuff. There are people who want it. They've been pushing for it. If you actually look up, I think it's Washington Post or maybe New York Times, but it's there's a timeline of the CIA's Family Jewels, I think is what it's called, timeline of. And it's interesting because that was during Nixon and Watergate, and the key names, some of the guys that juniors involved with that were like Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld. This is when was Watergate? Like way before those guys were in charge, right? They were the juniors, and there was someone said it's paywalled now, so it's hard to. But if you can use your free article every month, I think you get one free on a lot of these sites. But they said, well, we want this, we want these powers, and they said, well, the public isn't ready for that yet. So like these guys believe in this stuff. The people behind these programs think that it's for the better. They've learned no lessons from the Soviets. They've learned no lessons from communist China.
Or they have, but they're not the lessons we wanted them to learn.
They didn't take them as cautionary tales and as an example of how like East Germany and the Stasi was just so destructive to the social fabric, to humanity itself, to the people who had to live under it. They took it instead of a cautionary tale, they took it as an instruction book. That's right. They'll watch Minority Report and say, this is great. Or, they'll read Orwell and say, let's do that. And you're like, no, the whole point is like to show how it doesn't work. It's not right. And ultimately, again, like it's hard to explain to people how damaging these systems are, and that how unnecessary they are. I mean, we're old enough to remember a world where you didn't have listening devices in every room. You didn't have you weren't under constant surveillance and scrutiny, right? Where people still believed in liberty, and they still kind of treated their neighbors with some benefit of the doubt, right?
Right.
You didn't automatically just suspect everyone and everything. And of course, this was before the internet. This was before what I think they call media bias. The idea of like if a crime happens, 1,000 miles away, well, you think it's happening down your street because the way it gets reported on, right? It's right. If it bleeds, it leads. Sensationalism, right? The media is not guiltless in this too. So to your question, like, is this are we being nudged? I think I'm not going to go. I don't think it's fully intentional. I think a lot of the things that people are doing that fail, like a lot of these sort of let's loosen up on petty crime, and we're seeing how those policies don't work, that they've now led to people just free for all in in some cities. I think the people who want the surveillance systems, who are the authoritarians, are just waiting for opportunities. Opportunities present themselves. So like 9/11 happened, boom, we've been waiting. We wanted to put the Patriot Act ever since Nixon, basically. We've wanted these powers. So we wrote the law in the 90s, and we've just been waiting for something to happen that will allow us to push it through. Right. 9/11 was that something. So again, it's getting harder and harder to sell terrorist threats. So now they're like, think of the children, right? Oh, we got to ban adult content off the internet, right? That's another bill that's going in Canada, right? Where they're like, we're going to do this, and people are saying, well, no, the only way you could do that, but block sites on the internet, is by instituting digital ID, right? And you're like, and once you have digital ID, there's your file. There's your file for everyone that we were talking about earlier. Like, do you have a file? I mean, well, now you have and if you don't think that's hackable, like, everything's hackable. There's no
Well,
such.
even if it's not hackable, now you have an incentive.
Mhm.
And it's a two-way incentive. You have an incentive from business to government to say, okay, government, we can make lots more money selling whatever it is that we sell if we collect all this data.
Mhm.
And guess what? You probably want it. So we'll sell it to you also. So we'll make money from you. And we'll give you backdoors, and we'll give you this, and we'll give you that. Just let us do this thing that we want to do, or give us this tax break, or do whatever. And you create these creepy public-private partnerships.
Mhm.
Again, we used to call
Yeah.
this fascism,
Yeah.
where the governments and it's like this weird oligarchical cronyism where, who's benefiting more from whom.
Yeah.
I keep the people I like in power. Oh, we'll make sure only the businesses we like that have our people succeed. And that's basically how China functions. The supermarkets over there, they're not literally owned by the government. They don't need to be. The government just comes in and says, sure, you can operate a grocery chain, but every checkout is going to be outfitted with the retinal scan and the this and the that and the other, and we're going to get the data.
Yeah.
You're good with that, aren't you?
Well,
Sure, we are.
and that was the point of this Washington Post article, that these government doesn't need to get a warrant on you anymore, because they can just buy the information on you
That's
from
right.
the tech companies, or if they want, they could subpoena it. But even over the last 10 years, like, it's been reported numerous times how tech companies, telecom companies, if
Yep.
if the government comes calling and says, hey, we want information on this person or that person, they just fork it over. They don't
That's
even
right.
say, do you have a warrant?
That's right.
Right. Well, because they want to show how cooperative they are, or they get punished. Right. Back in, was it 2008? Um, Yah- Yahoo. Remember Yahoo? I think they're still around.
They're
Uh,
still around. I think they're one of the only ones that's not playing footsie with the government.
well,
And
they fought the FISA thing back in '08. They said, hey, we don't like this warrantless surveillance stuff that you're pushing, even back then.
right.
And but did you know, like, back then, Yahoo was like one of the top major names. Like, there was Google, Yahoo, right? Like,
Yep.
was there anyone else bigger in search? And then all of a sudden, Yahoo just kind of, and I don't want to say that they got punished uh, for daring to try to resist some of this stuff, but certainly companies that went along, and certainly like Microsoft, all these major companies were just going right along with it, and they had financial incentives to do so, because if you're going to benefit financially directly, but also you're going to benefit from not being uh, kept out of the loop, or targeted, or
Right.
given extra scrutiny, right? Like, well, oh, you didn't cooperate with us over here, so we're going to put the we're going to open up your books and make your life miserable for a few
That's
years.
right.
There's lots of ways that government, or corrupt people in government, can exert power over
Yep.
your company, your business, and your person, right?
People forget Gibson Guitar. What happened to them some years ago, where the government didn't like, I'm pretty sure it was like the CEO was complaining about policies and stuff.
Yeah.
Then suddenly they were raided.
Okay,
And
I haven't heard this one. And
yeah, they were raided
wow,
by federal agents. It tore their inventory apart, and they claimed they were looking for some rare kind of wood being used in these guitars that shouldn't have been used per regulation, whatever. But in fact, they had whatever they were supposed to have to be able to import this orders, but that wasn't the issue. But they shut down their business to conduct this investigation. They shut it down for a sufficient period of time that Gibson Guitar was on the brink.
wow.
Gibson Guitar.
They're
Eh,
huge. Yeah, they're like, yeah, Gibson
yeah,
and Fender. It
but
hasn't got bigger than that.
to my understanding, the thing that precipitated it was the CEO of the company,
That's some wrong
demonstrating
speak.
wrong speech, wrong think, whatever. And it was a huge scandal. It was like all over, say conservative type of media was like,
Yeah,
oh my God, look what they did. But it was so quickly hushed up. It was like it happened. And then it was like poof, forgotten. And I now will, will line up 5 people in the street and go, do you remember Gibson Guitar and what happened with them? Like, no, what are you talking about? So they also memory hole stories that you then, good luck trying to find it. You probably could find it if you searched and use specific search terms. But if you just try to, like government overreach, you're not going
Well,
to find the instances of when they did it. You'd have to
well,
have it by name.
Google's like gonna memory hole things, right? They're
Yeah.
hand in glove with a lot of this stuff. And Bing, and that includes anything that's Bing is going to include DuckDuckGo. That's Microsoft.
Hmm.
They've been hand in glove with a lot of these programs,
That's right.
and for their own self preservation, because they don't want to end up like Gibson Guitar. They don't want to end up like Yahoo,
Right.
out in the cold.
Yeah,
Um,
but now if I search Gibson Guitar
mm,
federal raid,
mhm.
there, this was 2012, just
Okay.
for frame of
Yeah.
reference. And I'm opening up an article from Reason because I can, all the other articles are kind of like, oh, well, now the Gibson raid makes sense, right? The most of the headlines. This one just says the Great Gibson Guitar Raid months later, still no charges filed. They came in with weapons, seized $500,000 worth of property, shut the factory down, and they've not charged us with anything, says Gibson Guitar's CEO. And this was a 2011 raid, but this was in 2012 that they still had no charges. It was the Environmental Investigation Agency said, Andrew Johnson said, it's not up to Gibson to decide which laws they want to respect. She points out that Gibson had previously been raided under the Lacey Act for imports from Madagascar, but they didn't file any charges. I don't know what ended up, they settled. I think they ended up going to court and they settled and probably paid some fine or whatever just to get them off their back so they wouldn't go out of business.
Well,
But this is extortion.
yeah, when you get investigated, whether it's your business or whether it's your person, and people are asking questions about you, people are opening up your life and your operations and all the things you're doing, it is highly disruptive, to your ability to live, to pursue your any kind of prosperity, to feed your family, to work and to exist. And it's highly damaging to your reputation,
Right.
especially on the personal level, right? Like people
Right.
um, who are being looked at now, as I understand it, in the United States. If you let's say you're being investigated under national security, they have this national security letter, that you receive that informs you that you are now being looked at, and you're
Yep.
basically to stop all your activities and sit still while they poke and
Yeah,
prod at
when
your
they
world.
poke in your life.
Yeah,
Yes,
right.
exactly.
Give you the uh, and and that's that in and of itself is pretty scary if you think about, for the average person to be like, wow, I've got the full weight of the government bearing down on me, and I've been told basically I don't really have. um and it's interesting because I've spent a lot of years, I'm I'm from Canada, but I've also lived in Europe a couple times, worked over there as we talked about, and lived many years in the United States, and all those years as someone on a visa, doing like working in film and all that, very aware, that I didn't have any civil rights, um, as a person living in the United States, with who was not a citizen. Right? It's funny because I had to get a local driver's license, and I get called for jury duty, and I write back and say, no, I
I'm
don't.
not a citizen.
I'm
I
not a
can't do
citizen.
this.
I don't think I can do jury duty. I'd be
Yeah,
happy to
exactly.
if it's required, but I don't think I'm
Yeah.
qualified. Not to mention I've got way too many people. I don't think I'm allowed to do jury duty in Canada because I have too many family members who are in the legal
Right.
profession. I know too much. But living without civil rights is, and I think Obama at some point was like, oh well, if they have a visa or green card, then uh, we'll we'll give them civil rights. But it was just him saying it, right?
That's right.
Now, if you're in the European Union or in Canada, it doesn't matter. I'm pretty sure this is true. Like 99.9% sure this is true. That no matter who you are, whether you're a citizen or not, you have full civil rights.
Interesting.
In the United States, no. I've seen people say this, that United States Constitution is not a contract with the world; it only applies to Americans, right? So, I've
Except
seen
it
that
says
argument.
people.
Well,
It
right?
says people. It doesn't say citizens.
Well,
So that's
Obama was
interesting.
like, "No, we extend it to anyone here," and but that's, again, that's policy. That's not law. That's policy, and the policy can change on a dime, right? Well,
True. True.
I know there have been There was that businessman back in the, I guess, late 90s, early 2000s, maybe. He was a
Mhm.
Canadian businessman. He had a business in the United States, business in Canada, and he had a business in Cuba. And he got arrested in the United States because the law at the time was like, you cannot do business with Cuba. And I had this debate with a lawyer friend of mine from an American lawyer friend of mine, and they said, well, he was doing business with Cuba, and that's against American law. I said, yeah, but he's Canadian, and his American business was not doing business with the Cuban business. They were totally separate enterprises, nothing to do with each other. Well, it's American law, and I said, well, but he wasn't in America, and American law only applies in the United States of America. Your law ends at the end of your jurisdiction, right? American law does not apply in the rest of the world. But in the last 10 years or so, there's been efforts to make it apply, right? With a lot of the offshore stuff, Obama chasing people's money all over the place and saying, well, we're going to exert these authorities to people wherever they go, right? And you're like, well, no, I mean, what's legal in one place could be illegal in another, right? There's certain countries
Exactly.
where it's illegal to drink wine,
Exactly.
right? And guess what? There's certain states that are dry, like that you can't sell alcohol, right? There's different laws in different jurisdictions. So they have this attempt to kind of expand the authority beyond the local jurisdiction. And you're seeing that right now in the United States with certain states saying, like with the abortion issue, right? Like if you travel out of state, we're going to punish you here, right? And you're like, the whole concept of laws and jurisdictions needs to be regardless of what side of that issue a person falls on. Like this is getting silly, it's getting ridiculous at this point where we're trying to expand the jurisdiction of laws. And this gets us to the Five Eyes question, which you
Yeah,
topic that you
exactly.
mentioned,
Yeah.
is on the flip side of that coin. um a lot of people, like in the United States or in Britain or Canada, whatever, they don't consider the ramifications of laws that are being passed in other countries, specifically other countries that have intelligence sharing and security sharing agreements with each other. Like they talk about the Five Eyes, and that's not like some new thing. It's not some like yarn on a push board, a pin board, conspiracy theory thing. I mean, there was a book from the 1980s, I think, from Desmond Ball about the Five Eyes. I studied it when I was doing uh, my work in sort of intelligence, academic history of intelligence, and all that. The Five Eyes is the United States, the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and I'm pretty sure there are a couple other countries that have similar type of treaties. A lot of them it's treaty based, um,
Mhm.
and they're intelligence sharing agreements. They're coordination agreements between the intelligence agencies and the law enforcement agencies in each of these different countries. And from a tracking international terrorists to organized crime, it makes sense, right? There's a certain
Right.
utility to those things.
Sure.
Um,
And that's how people buy into them and go, "Sounds like a good idea."
yeah, like this horror crime lord fled to another to Europe. Well, we can track him there. Whatever. And we'll call the Brits. James Bond will get on it. Uh, um, or more accurately, like we'll be able to access their surveillance systems over there, right, and track this and get access to that information. Um, but what some people don't realize is that your information, your communications, like your business, proprietary business information, your personal life, the thing that you were talking to your mother or your brother or your spouse about on your cell phone.
Right.
um Anytime you communicate anything over the internet, and most home phones now are connected to plug into your modem, they don't connect to the hard line anymore,
Or I don't even have one. I
right? A lot of people
only
don't
have
have
my
them.
cell phone.
Right, so everything is now digital, which means everything is basically voice over IP. If you're talking on the phone or you're sending messages or emails, it's all over the internet. And so if you're sending a message, private conversation about new business idea or something that's really tragic in your family or something that's very personal, right? That is just between you and the other person, right? And you're sending it to somebody who lives down the street from you, right? oh, that's protected by privacy laws, Fourth Amendment in the United States and Canada, the Charter, right? Bill of Rights type laws in most of these countries, right? So I think Australia doesn't have a proper Bill of Rights, if I'm not mistaken. But so they're known as sort of the weakest link in the Five Eyes, and we'll get to why. Um, so you send a message, or you're having a conversation with a person who lives across town, or they live in San Francisco, wherever, someone who lives in your country. As long as that signal, well, there's lots of workarounds for that. They've got the FISA courts and the ability to surveil people and to snoop. But let's just say under the standard, what most people think is the law, like that. Well, I have privacy rights,
Right.
I have privacy protections. Well, it is not difficult to bounce your communication. Like right now, like if you're talking to somebody on your phone and it's going over the internet, well, that can be bounced through a different country before. So even though the person's down the street, it goes onto the internet, it gets bounced to a node in the UK or in Canada.
Yep.
Right, Easy Go Canada, and then it goes to the other person. Well, what happened there? Your information went outside the United States jurisdiction.
Yep.
As
now they can look at it.
Right, and this is an old trick. They did this in the Second World War, when they were wanted to know what people were writing in letters that were being sent to Europe, because they were worried about like the Nazis getting, maybe some person was writing down the number of ships in the harbor, and they sent a letter to their friend over in Berlin, and that information. So, well, you need a warrant to open up someone's letter mail, or to tap someone's phone, or to do all these things. You need a warrant. Well, but there's a lot of letters. There's a lot of letter mail. We can't get a warrant for everything. We want to open it all. Now, in wartime, in actual wartime, there's an argument for these types of exceptions, right? Same thing, like the Patriot Act was basically almost like a war measure, right? And you talk about how it was supposed to sunset. It was supposed to
That's right.
expire,
It was supposed to sunset, and they kept putting it back in.
They keep renewing because they don't want to give up those powers because they like them too much.
Well, that's why they called it a war on terrorism.
Right. And
because that could never end.
You know what war on rhymes with?
Moron.
Anyone who buys war on this, war on that, it rhymes with that.
Poverty, drugs.
Yeah, it's always just a ridiculous, like, again, they're using it to sell it to people. So what they did in the Second World War with these letters is all the letter mail being sent to Europe got rerouted through Canada.
Yeah.
And then they had the Canadian authorities open up all the letter mail. All the American privately protected, Fourth Amendment protected stuff.
Yep.
Wide open. And then they reported on what they found, because a foreign government has absolutely no obligation to respect the laws of a different nation.
This is why we transported prisoners to Gitmo.
Right.
And other places, and how we had these so-called black sites. Like we've seen the movies. We know this happens with physical humans.
Yeah.
Why would you think that your digital footprint is going to be treated any differently than your actual footprint? In fact, it's so much easier, much more cost effective. And they have workarounds for their workarounds. And this is what I've told people about the cameras in the classroom is, well, but there'll be rules and they won't be able to do this. And they already have workarounds to get around your anti-DEI laws and I tutor college bound seniors, and, the Supreme Court says no more affirmative action for dealing with applicants to get into college. That's a violation, blah, blah, blah. So now I look at the essay questions. Good luck trying to answer one of those essay questions with anything,
because they're loaded. They're fully loaded.
If you're white and male, like you got nothing to say.
Yeah,
your essay questions be boring AF, and on top of that, so now they know. Oh, the kids are going to try to get around it even more. The kids will try to get around our workaround by using ChatGPT and this and that to conjure a story about themselves. So now we're going to just reduce the amount of the essay value. We're going to treat it totally on like a personal interaction, which no one can keep a record of. So they're going old school. They're going where I'm telling you to go, so you won't be surveilled. The government and the people who agree with this ideology are going off grid, so you can't surveil them.
Yeah, but it's okay when they do it.
It's okay when they do it. So, you put the cameras in the classroom, guess what they're going to do? They're going to find ways to hide this stuff even more, do even less that you recognize, change all the vocabulary, and you're going to go, what did I just watch?
I think there's a certain belief among people who are proponents of this stuff in winner takes all, right? It's like once they've achieved hegemony, then nobody can say boo. So both, and it's, again, this is why things are so much more polarized, and they're raising the stakes because look, if they get in, they're going to take over and do everything, and then they'll lock us out of power forever, right? And well, no, if they get in, they're going to, and both sides sort of in this
There's no
increasingly
side.
polarized.
It's
Well,
one.
and the politics, I mean, are being played off as side by sides,
Sure,
and
sure.
catastrophized to think the other is pure evil and the other is
Yeah.
pure evil. And meanwhile, the people who are really behind a lot of this stuff are just like loving it because to them
Right.
it's an opportunity for them to expand the power and the control.
That's it.
And it's weird to me because what's the point of it all, right? Like, why do they want this? Well, they want it because they want it. They want it because it's power. And it's like power's better to have than not, right? And you're like, what kind of world do you envision with all
Well,
this?
there's some research out there that indicates there's a high degree of psychopathology at the highest levels of power. That, in other words, the type of person who succeeds in this kind of environment, because it's a very hard environment to work in. You end up, as you've pointed out, you to be a decent, honest, caring, individual, rights respecting person, you're going to get chewed up and spit out. You have to be sort of ruthless. You have to be able to lie. You have to be Machiavellian to work around because people are spying on you all the time.
Yeah.
So the type of person who can succeed in a highly surveilled, low trust society is probably going to have some psychopathic tendencies. And then you get you don't need millions of those people. You just need a few. They could need to have either access to billions of dollars, or have it of their own.
Yeah.
And once they get that access to power, all it does is feed their psychopathology. So what kind of world do they want to have? It's like,
they don't care.
They don't know. It's just endless. They start to believe they're a god. George Soros has even said that he started to sort of imagine himself a god, and what world would he make? And people who talk like this openly, unashamedly, these are dangerous people.
Well, they see everyone as ants,
That's
right?
it.
They see us all as ants, as we will incentivize, we can manipulate, and we can modify the system. They think in terms of systems, and we're all just a bunch of ants in the system that they can nudge to do what they want, because they think that would be better. And at the end of the day, like, I think a lot of these people, again, back to the power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely. Even good people who maybe went in with good intentions can become corroded, can become biased, can become radicalized or jaded and cynical about humanity. And they forget that every single person is a person. Every single person is an individual human being who needs, I personally believe that personal liberty is a necessary core, integral part of your existence as a sentient being. We need, that is your humanity, right? Is your ability to think for yourselves, to self-direct, at least insofar as you're not stepping on someone else's liberty, right? Like that's if we can arrange society on that basis, then we're doing a lot better. That's
it's sort of like the desert island test. Like, what could I do if I were alone on a desert island? And, I mean, it's like whatever you want. You can do whatever you want. Now, one other person comes to the island with you, and this is the test of, whether you are a rational or egoist, or just an egoist, like a psychopath. And then, as do you realize there's enough coconuts coming off the trees, you could share the coconuts, or you can like figure out a way to trade the coconuts for the crabs that the other person caught or whatever. And you just keep extrapolating from there. And you realize, like, if I want the coconut, we're both big, strong, like bull. If I want the coconuts, I got to trade with him. I can't just beat him over the head while he sleeps, because then I'm not going to have any crabs because he catches the crabs.
Right. So there's benefits. You're building a society. And
you're interdependent by choice, voluntary action. And unfortunately, we've given so much more power to the people who mistrust individuals, but they have a bizarre faith in large groups.
Yeah, which is so backwards.
And our founders, at least the United States, had the
Mhm,
opposite view. They had a very, very dim view of large groups of people,
mhm.
but they had more faith in individuals. And so they realized that if you really want more freedom, the greatest degree of freedom for the largest number of people, then people have to be politically equal. So they
Mhm.
have to be free, politically free, free to speak their own, thoughts and think their own thoughts and come and go and define their own, agenda. And that's going to result in the greatest degree of freedom and prosperity for everybody rather than, having it be like, well, we have faith in the collective. And
Yeah,
we've seen it play out in the 20th century, as you said. You went over to what was there in the after the collapse of the
yeah,
greatest experiment in collectivism next to China,
yeah.
and then people will say, "But isn't China successful?"
Well, don't believe a whole lot that's coming out of China.
Right, because, you don't
'Cause
know. The honest
it's
answer is you don't know, and even
no.
if you go there as a non-Chinese person,
Mhm.
you only see what they let you see. You only go where they let you go. You're only
It's
gonna
like
have a
the
conversation as free as they want you to have it.
it's like the 1936 Olympics, right? In Germany, where they sanitized everything, made it look good. I mean, China has a massive propaganda apparatus
Mhm.
and sanitizes and uh, their image. They're very image conscious.
Yep,
And
exactly.
and
It's the I don't think I taught Chinese students for 3 years, and the takeaway for me was that every single person I dealt with on the adult side, obviously the kids are kids, but even as the
yeah.
kids got older. So once they were older than 6 or 7, I saw it in the kids too. There is something very I don't know how to explain it. There's something missing. There's just something missing behind the eyes. There's
Mhm.
something missing in their whole demeanor. You just didn't pick up on any motivation that was other than what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And there's a
And
lot of competition
and
amongst them, but it's competition to be seen.
by the authority.
Mhm.
I saw that. That was what I saw still in their eyes in Eastern Europe. Even though they were free of it, it was like they had been kind of. It was like they're cultists who didn't know how
Yeah,
to function in the real world,
exactly.
um, trying to sort of what we can have differences of opinion.
I know
What
it's so bizarre.
it's
So,
it's just damaging, and it makes it makes it all it makes it all impossible. You cannot have a free society. You cannot have a free people. Uh, you cannot have not freedom, like total freedom to do whatever you want. I'm talking like a society with liberty
right.
and actual justice for all.
I
um,
hate the
where
expression "for all"
yeah,
now because they've
yeah, yeah, yeah,
co-opted it for Marxist purposes.
yeah. But the idea that everyone is equal before the in the eyes of the law, that justice is blind, right?
Right.
These are principles for a reason. A lot of these people forget, and again, maybe because history isn't really taught very well, um, that a lot of the liberties and freedoms that we enjoy, that we take for granted, is I guess more the point.
Yeah.
Were hard won from a history of an authoritarianism of what they call the ancient ancien regime. The that history was not uh, free and easy. Most people lived in poverty. Very
Yeah.
small number of people had power. Right? It was aristocracies
Mhm.
ruled. Most people had no vote for most of human history. Like this whole idea, like everyone gets to vote, or again, like you hear, we hear about women's suffrage. You know, every year, we hear that, but men's suffrage didn't happen that much earlier, right?
That's
Yeah,
right.
you had to be wealthy or own property or be a noble to have any say in the running of the realm, in the politics of the day and the policy. So the average person through most of history, like, and most people think, well, I wish I lived back in the day, and I'm like, guess what? You
You
wouldn't
mean where
have
you
been a
died at 30 if you were lucky?
well, you wouldn't have probably wouldn't be the king or the queen or the duchess or the count. You would have been a peasant or a serf, a slave, right? Like basically,
Yep.
you would have been poor, scrabbling in the dirt, and it wouldn't have been very fun. Or you would have been pressed into service in the navy and stuck in a ship or kidnapped and turned into a galley slave. Like it was not a good time for the average person
We're
for
not teaching our kids this history at all.
no. And,
It's all about, privilege and power. And the presumption is like, if you lived in Northern Europe and as Western civilization was developing, that your life was rosy. It was great.
these historical programs where it's all like
Yeah.
the nobles and the castles and the romance, and I'm like, and Mr. Darcy and all this other stuff, whatever. Like, that's not what most people experience. That's not
No.
normal life. That was what the fancy pants people got, and they were less than the 1.00001%.
Right.
You know, you were so a lot of these things are hard when, like, they talk about, for instance, like the Star Chamber, in England. They talk about the Inquisition,
Yeah.
right? The where people were treated as guilty of some religious heresy, guilty until
Oh, that sounds familiar.
right, yeah, and like these were
Confess.
massive,
Confess.
massive, yeah. Oh, you won't confess? Well, put the thumb screws on them, right? Like, look, we'll light a fire on you, literally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Torture you a bit. And you look at this and you say, like, have we learned no lessons from history? These liberties and freedoms that we are so precarious because in the context of history, we haven't had them for very long. And they say, well, the history is these rights, these freedoms, these ideals of all people are created equal. Well, if those were emergent, dangerous ideas,
Right.
and there have always been sort of elements that view the idea that every person actually has value, that we should have a right to our own privacy, that we should have the freedom to pursue our own happiness, or that just liberty in general is dangerous. That's wrong. That people shouldn't have that. They should be
Well, it's
controlled.
only dangerous to people who don't want you to have it.
Right. And why?
That's really
And
it.
why? And some people are afraid of it, and that's, I think, part of the other thing is some people are afraid of other people's liberty, right? And they're afraid of their own, right? Like I had a conversation with someone a few years ago. I said, well, and they were supporting a lot of this stuff, a lot of this surveillance stuff and
Yeah.
law and order, like, and I don't mean like basic law and order. I mean like the hardcore. And I said, why? Why would you support that? Like, why do you want all these rules over every little thing and constant, like, the watching eye on your? They said, because it makes me feel safe.
Yep.
And I was like,
but notice
yeah,
they say it makes me feel safe.
right. And then I asked them a few days later in a separate conversation about something political, and if they disagree with a government, and they said, well, I don't really agree with it, but I can't say anything opposite. And they were afraid.
So you feel safe, but you're afraid.
They were afraid that if they expressed their disagreement, that the government would punish them in some way. And I was like, you want to give the government power,
Exactly,
because it makes you feel safe, but then you're afraid of the government, and you don't dare ever utter anything that's disagreeing or critical because you think the government can just come and punish your life.
You've literally just encapsulated the typical put cameras in the classroom person.
Yeah.
The identical person who's convinced that the government is still, like, using Wayfair catalogs to trade children and human trafficking, and all the upper echelons of the government are secretly spying on us at all times, or whatever, which they probably are. But anyway, and then just the second part, not the first part. And then they'll turn around and say, like, but I want to hand them cameras to live stream to whomever they feel like it, everything that's going on after I drop my child off in their care.
They're not putting two and two together of their own words, their own thing. It's like, you don't trust this, or you don't trust this. You suspect it. You think there's all these abuses happening.
Exactly.
And you want to give those people more power to keep doing more power to abuse.
And then they tell you you're crazy, you're wrong. And here's my favorite is, like, first of all, they say it would be easy to do it. Mm-hmm. They don't think the cost would be low. Anytime somebody tells me something that's going to be government owned is going to be a low cost, we can do it cheaply. We just somebody said we'll do it with webcams hooked up to Rumble. just live streaming to Rumble. I'm like, all right, my brain is cramping over the number of laws that's violating.
First of all, that's not going to happen that way.
No.
There's going to be a tech firm that is ready to pounce on these types of laws, and they're going to have
No.
the proprietary system that we're going to install in your school, and it's going to cost $30 million. And
Yep.
you can't afford textbooks now,
Yep.
right? Like,
but we have to keep it going, and then you'll have the two parties fighting
Yeah.
back and forth over what do we keep.
because there's always a tech bro who wants to make money off this.
Always. And, and they'll say like, first it's gonna be easy, it's gonna be cheap. Oh, yes, you'll just go ask for the footage, and then a person who's gonna be super, super happy to help you. This
Right.
government employee
Right.
is going to be so much happier to tell you, here's your little thumb drive of the footage that you wanted from a week ago last Tuesday.
Yeah.
And
There'll be a fee. There'll be a fee on that.
There'll be a fee. There'll be a 45 to 60-day wait period. You got to trust that the person on the other end actually gave you really the footage and not some other bullshit that they came up with, whatever.
Mhm.
And all these things, but you try to tell them, they're like, no, you're wrong. You're just so wrong. And you know what I think? I think that you support all the bad things in the classroom. And it's like, after a point, I really just start thinking, David, like maybe I just don't need to be trying to help people anymore, because it's too far gone. It's too far gone.
Well, and this speaks to what you said earlier about we're late in the 11th hour, 11:55, and I think so much of this stuff's sitting in place. Some of it's been built. So much of it is, and it's already insidious, not just at a government level, but with regards to these tech companies, with the social media, and even your email companies. Like, there's weird, creepy things going on at all of these firms, and not government doesn't want to regulate that. They don't want to say, well, we did a law that gives us more power to surveil and to get access to all this tech company stuff. And you're like, wait a second. Shouldn't you be more focused on like that we need a law that says the tech companies shouldn't be abusing people with these powers? Right? Nobody's asking that question.
Ding, 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 ding.
Right? Nobody's
Exactly.
saying, hey, government, what is the purpose of government, right? To regulate things, to try to maybe ensure some fairness. Government, no, we're in government. We know best. We know better. I work for the government, therefore I am better than you. So what we have now is this idea of this: the government is now the elite and the rest of us are the peasants. And it's an easy trap to fall into when you have power and you're in a position of power, especially if you're a bureaucrat too, not elected. So they can't just get rid of you that easily.
That's right.
They know best. They're the experts. Who are these people out there in the world talking, chattering? How dare they? Who do they think they are? Well, the United States have the phrase "we the people," right? It was governance with the consent of the people. So wouldn't government and its agencies and its organizations be doing its actual job?
Yeah.
To protect the public,
right,
from overreach, from being investigated for no good reason, for Google and Facebook and all these other, and for the telecom companies from snooping on your personal life and your information, right? Isn't that a better use of time and energy for government people, for our elected politicians and the bureaucrats to be focused on? Is like, no, we want to make sure that people are as free as possible, that people can have the opportunity to go and pursue their lives, their livelihoods as unrestricted as possible without stepping on other people's lives, right? Like, is that not the sole purpose
that was supposed to be
of self-governance?
And it was supposed to be. And like I said, I just see so many people asking for more of the same. And that's why I wanted to have this conversation with you, because, of the people that I follow on social media, there's a really tiny handful. It's a frighteningly tiny handful of people who just seem to instinctively get it. Although now I understand more about your background, as far as I remember, you told me about the stuff overseas, but I think relative to this conversation, it's really important information that I hope everybody's listening to what David's saying, that, there he was right after the fall of the Soviet Union and the Soviet bloc countries. And I traveled around when they were East Bloc countries and I was in college. So I remember face to face what these people were like this.
Yeah.
But, understand that this is something you really have to stop and ask yourself, why do I want this? And who benefits? Right? How do I know that I would benefit in any way, shape, or form? What are the potential unintended consequences, like unintended negative consequences of this? And the most fundamental, which we've talked about through this whole program, is why do I believe that more surveillance makes people behave better? Because I think we've explained, and even though neither of us is sort of, you know, technical experts on, you know, the psychology of surveillance or anything like that. I don't think you have to be. I think you just have to have come face to face with highly surveilled people. I think you need to have studied it just like a little,
Well, we've
really.
seen it. We've seen the effects
Yeah,
of what it's done. It's not like it's a mystery. We don't need
it's
to
not.
have a psychologist at some
No.
university write a paper on it.
Well, and
We
I
can,
only mention that before the
yeah,
inevitable appeals to authority, where people say, well, who the hell are you and he, and you
yeah,
guys don't know anything. It's like,
yeah.
you don't need to be a credentialed expert in human behavioral analysis to just open your eyes and look around to
Yeah.
how people behave differently now that there's a cell phone in every hand.
And we're
We know
seeing it.
law enforcement behaves
Cameras
differently, but
everywhere. Yeah.
people are fighting, like kids are fighting to get it on camera. So you already see evidence of people changing their behavior, not for the better, in performative ways. Social media is your best example.
Hmm.
You don't need to do a research paper. There it is. So
Yeah.
why you would believe that people are going to behave better with more of the same, I'll never understand.
Well, and we're seeing people gaming it. I think there was like stories of cops, maybe it was Philadelphia or whatever,
Yeah.
planting evidence, then using their body cams to walk back in and fake discover the evidence that they had planted
Exactly. I mean,
earlier. Like it just,
everything can be gamed.
yeah, right. And so this idea, oh no, no, it'll work. Everything can be gamed. Everything is corrupted. Everything is hackable.
Yeah.
They want you all your information. They want you to put this digital ID schemes. Oh, you're going to put all your personal information into this thing, and that's not going to be hacked. I'm
Right.
sorry. Um,
Everything is
it's
hackable.
yeah, and I think what the maybe the right, the left, the center, everybody maybe needs to sort of take a moment, take a pause, and step back and say, wait a second, do we need this stuff?
Right.
All this stuff, it's expensive, it's damaging to the social fabric. Is it going to solve all our problems? Is it going to fix things any more than existing laws and existing, like, look, a lot of law enforcement, and like, look, I'm a big fan of, like, I know a lot of, like I said, I know people in law, in the courts, in law enforcement, and the job, I respect a lot of them. A lot of them are good people, but a lot of this stuff is, they like it because it makes their lives easier, because they don't actually have to do the actual work of investigating.
Right.
Right. Well, if everyone's under surveillance, we'll just press the buttons and pull up everything about them. We can snoop that way. We don't actually have to do our jobs.
Yeah. So
Right.
are you going to get the best people to go into the field? That's the other thing, is that it's an illusion of an
Hmm.
easy button.
Yeah.
And then with the people who hire the people
Yeah.
to come into this line of work,
Yeah.
are they really going to be looking for the people with the highest caliber, sort of ethics and morals and skills? Or are they just looking at
Yeah.
somebody who can press a button and I
Right.
just connect A to B? Everything, flows from the ethics of it in the first place. Anybody whose ethics say it's perfectly okay to gather all this information,
Has
and
questionable ethics to begin with.
that's what I said.
Yeah.
So I brought up the
Yeah.
psychopathology. So I think, like you said, taking a pause is a really good suggestion. I think,
Well,
just
and I think the real argument here is that the right, the left, liberals, conservatives, Democrats, Republicans, whatever, in all these, in the United States,
yeah,
and in UK and Canada, all these countries that are connected
yeah,
informationally now. um, I think the real argument shouldn't really be left and right at this point. I mean, what needs to really be opened up is a conversation about authoritarianism versus
mhm,
individual
yeah,
liberty, right?
that's what it is.
And that's the conversation they don't want people to have. They want everyone bickering over BS, over pronouns, or uh, pollution, or environmental stuff, with bickering over anything but the fact that, are these systems necessary?
Exactly.
Do they have any real benefit? Are the negative side effects, the negative effects of these things, the abuses that they enable, right? Because we've got lots of cases of police using spying stuff to spy on their spouse or their
Yeah.
ex-girlfriend or boyfriend. Like the amount of abuses that this stuff enables is likely, and I would say from the Soviet example, worse.
Yeah.
Like it's like the
I would
cure is
definitely,
worse than the original problem, right? Like so
without a
these
doubt.
so- these solutions are not solutions. They're just building bigger, worse problems, um, where we could have actually just did better triage, put our resources to enforcing existing laws in a more effective way, rather than like, no, let's build a giant machine that's going to solve all our problems and probably hand it all to the AI in a few years, right? Because
Yeah.
the laziness is just, well, the AI can do it, and I'm sorry, like
Yeah. I don't even,
that's
yeah. Okay.
yeah,
So,
like
all
forget
right.
corruptible people, but
Well, I'm really grateful that you came and sat and talked to us about all of this because, like I said, I think you've got a lot of really important points that I want people to digest and think about. And yeah, so I hope the things in Canada don't go the way of Trudeau, the what way he wants. But I mean, it looks like it's going to pass, and I just hope that we can keep speaking out while we can, like keep speaking the truth
mhm.
about what surveillance is and does to society and to our children. And I've told people on my channel, I'll tell you, I'll die on this hill. I'm not going to stop talking about the dangers of surveillance and the surveillance state. I see it as um, one of the biggest dangers that we face right now. It's much worse than any woke curriculum that could go in
Mhm.
front of your kid. Is the being spied on 24 hours a day already is harming them, and I don't want to do it any more than we're already doing. So
Yeah.
that's kind of where I want to leave it. Do you have any final thoughts or words
Well,
for
I was
people?
reading a while ago about, I guess there was like a repeal movement, maybe I think in the '70s, and I feel like a lot of these programs, a lot of these laws or legislations or things that have been enacted or enabled, um, sorry, the Enabling Act, um,
Exactly.
uh, you know, like you said, the Patriot Act was supposed to expire, supposed to sunset. There's sunset clauses in a lot of this stuff, and they keep renewing it. But there's no reason why a political movement couldn't grow, a sort of liberty-based, couldn't develop among multi-partisan too. Could be, again, like in the United States, could be some Democrats, some Republicans, maybe with a bit of a libertarian contingent, at least the sane ones, and this idea of like, let's review some of these programs and some of these
Right.
laws and determine whether they're doing any actual good. Are they better than what we had before? Because the cost of them, the cost in terms of financially, but also the social cost of how this resentment that they create. Can we? Is it better?
That's right.
And if it isn't, then maybe we can repeal some of these laws. Maybe we can let some of these things sunset and expire. Maybe we don't need them. Maybe there's a better way. Uh, and maybe community building. Maybe like re fostering trust among your neighbors and your
Exactly.
teachers and your parents. Because what they've been doing for the last 10, 15, 30 years now, building this stuff, it's not working.
No,
It's a waste of resources. It's making everybody resent everybody. Um, and so like I like to joke that like if I was, and I've toyed with the idea of like, should I ever run for political office? And if I did, like that, what's the guy in Argentina? Javier,
Millet.
yeah, like he had his chainsaw, and I'd be like a Sharpie, right? Like a big black marker. I mean,
Yep.
maybe the Sharpie people don't want me to name them, but we'll call it a big black marker, and we're going to go through the laws and be like, no, this is wasteful law. This is a wasteful law. This is a wasteful law. Let's get rid of this law and keep the ones that work and get rid of the ones that are there's so much junk on the books, and they just keep adding more. And I'm like, do we elect people to go in and write more laws and
Exactly.
and add more rules and give themselves more power? And they always give themselves a raise too while they're at it. You ever notice that? Um,
Exactly.
or are we trying to? Would we like to maybe elect some people who are like, hey, I just want to go in and make the system work a little better, clean up some of the mess, get rid of some of the corruption, and without being vindictive about it, right? right? Because if you're
Exactly.
going to go and I'm going to go in and wipe out all the corruption, well, they're gonna off you if you do that. You don't want to end up like taking a car ride in Dallas. Um, but if you maybe could say, look, we're just going to go in and try to get the system. It's not bad. There's the levers of power exist. It's a model that kind of works if we try to like renew it every once in a while. We try to get back to basics of what's the point here is
Exactly.
people's liberties. Our job here is to preserve the individual's ability as much as we can, right?
Exactly.
We're not here to give you handouts. We're not here to like coddle you. We're just here to protect people from abuses of power, including our own. I would love it if people in government would start thinking that way, you
Yeah,
know,
exactly.
of like, but that's,
But
I think that's something.
but we the people have to start living differently and thinking differently, and that's why I do what I do, and I have guests like you come here and talk to us because
Well,
if no one puts the idea in front of you in the first place, and I'm not trying to like pat
mm,
myself on the back. I have a small audience, but my point is like I'll do what I can, and hopefully I'm one of many. Hopefully other people are gonna talk about this more and more and more. I know I'm certainly not the only one. We know various Joe Rogan, a lot of different people have been
mm,
talking about surveillance issues.
yeah,
I just want it to be in front of parents because I think we've talked about surveillance uh, in America as sort of adults over our adult lives and our
mm,
businesses and our travel and our comings and our banking and whatever. And we forget that our children are already being surveilled like crazy. I've talked about it on the channel. I've talked about it in Carrie Smith's channel.
yep,
I'll be talking to an expert on AI tomorrow. So
cool,
we're, kids in college
mhm,
are when you have an entire generation, and now it's going to be more like 2.5 generations growing up from the time they're the alphas and the Z's have had these in their hands since they could hold them, since
mhm,
they sat upright and had
yep,
hands that could hold. So that means they were surveilled. It's not just that they were getting used to looking at tech. Tech was you looking at them.
yeah,
And we need to understand the impact of that on their developing brains and their developing psyches and expectations of the world. And just layering on more of the same, claiming we're keeping them safer without stopping to think about what we've already got, like is what we already have keeping them safer. And the answer from me is a resounding no. And I would really ask people to do what you said, which is stop, take a breath, and if what you want is your children to be safer, then the people best able to do that are looking in the mirror.
yep,
Right back at you.
yeah,
Because if
right,
that's your true intention, you're the best person to do it. Nobody, literally
mm,
nobody walking this earth is going to be better at that than you are. And then yes, you might have to make some difficult decisions. That's why I asked about those Soviet parents, is if they had a wayback machine and you said to them, "Hey, knowing what you know now, and giving you that freedom at 11:55 p.m. to walk away from the government apparatus and try to do it on your own and get all your neighbors to do the same, would you have done it?" I
they did
like to
in 1989, 1990. That's what they eventually did,
Yeah, so
right?
that but the whole society had to collapse.
Yeah, and you know
So
what? Do we really want to go there? Do we really want to make it so that our kids or our kids' kids, the Gen Z and Alpha, have to live through a full oppressive regime in order to get to the point where they
right,
realize the society realizes that it's not tenable? Like, let's
exactly.
take a note from the Soviet collapse and from the rampant abuses that we hear
Yeah,
about from China, and say, no, we don't
no.
need to go down this road. Let's change
Yeah.
course. Let's get back to some basics
Yeah,
here.
I don't think people are having babies today going, "Oh, I'm so excited for your grandchildren to grow up and be the next John Adams and George Washington."
Yeah,
It's
or
like, first of all, you can't guarantee that the dark ages lasted for over 1,000 years. Secondly, and if we could, that's another possibility.
yeah,
And so people romanticize this kind of stuff a lot on both sides. They romanticize how great it's going to be to have everything taken care of for us, and then they romanticize the tearing down and rebuilding of a new order, like that's going to be perfect. And guys, the vast majority of human history, as David pointed out, was pretty flippin' miserable. And I certainly don't want to think that we only had, I don't know, about like 80 years max of really prosperous, healthy, peaceful life for the majority of people on planet Earth. I really don't want to think it was such a tiny blip in the history of mankind. I really don't. And so, that's why I do this and have guests like you. So
Well,
I'm grateful.
hopefully
Thank
this is
you.
where it starts, and
Yeah.
hopefully more people talk about this stuff, and they'll talk
Yeah.
to their families, their friends, and they'll start their own podcasts and newsletters
Pamphlets.
and doing things not on the internet, pamphlets. Yeah,
Samizdat, whatever you
stuff.
got to do.
Yeah.
Whatever you got to
So
do. But thank you so much, David
yeah.
Krae,
Well,
for
thanks for
joining
having me.
me.
Yeah.
And thanks to everybody for watching. Once again, please like, share, subscribe. Consider joining my community at wokescreen.com/the reason we learn for extra bonus content and private chats and things. And you can find David on X. Your deets will be down below.
All right.
And I guess that's about it. So thank you so
Oh,
much,
very good.
and
Always
have
a
a
pleasure.
have a great one. And I'll see you on the flip side.
You got it.